Chapter 334. At hearing that Xiao Sha's magical power was so powerful, the Wang sisters turned pale with fright. Wang Keting was even more out of her wits. She grabbed Qi Mingjiao's sleeve and cried, "Senior Sister Qi, what should we do? Please think of something." Qi Mingjiao shook her head and smiled bitterly. "Junior sister, you think too highly of me." On the other hand, Lu Yinyi was acting strangely at this moment. She had a nonchalant expression on her face as she said, "Two junior sisters, don't worry. After Master entered the sect, he has gone through countless storms and encountered countless difficulties and obstacles. How could he rashly agree to this kind of bet without knowing the opponent's background? He must have some other hidden methods, it's just that we don't know about it." Qi Mingjiao thought about it and her eyes lit up. She nodded and said, "Yinyi's words make sense. We are outsiders. How would we know what Uncle Master Zhang is thinking? No one knows what will happen until the very last moment." Zhang Yan came to the competition with a plan in mind. However, when he saw that the aristocratic families wanted to stop Ning Chongxian, he suddenly had another idea. He had a vague guess of a possibility, but he could not be completely sure. He needed to see the reaction of the master and his disciples before he could decide what to do next. After all, his strength alone wasn't enough to go against the general situation, but he could take advantage of the situation and use it to reap his share of benefits. Therefore, he might as well wait a little longer. After tonight, when he knew the master and his disciples' plan, it would not be too late to make a decision. Today, all he needed to do was ask for a draw. Even if he guessed wrong, it did not matter. They could fight again tomorrow. It would not be too late to decide the winner then. Seeing that the two had made up their minds, Elder Sun stepped aside and closed his eyes, pretending to be indifferent. Xiao Sha made a please gesture towards Zhang Yan and said in a friendly tone, "Since this proposal was proposed by me, then junior brother Zhang can make the first move." As soon as he finished speaking, he retreated several feet and shook his body. The sound of metal clashing resounded. Zhang Yan glanced at Xiao Sha and saw that his expression was natural. He stood there, his sleeves fluttering in the wind, looking indescribably elegant. He couldn't help but nod his head. He was curious to see how Xiao Sha was going to defend against his attacks. After pondering for a moment, he made a hand seal. With a rumble, 365 drops of serene heavy water flew into the air and hovered above his head. At this moment above the clouds, a few Zenrins of the master and disciple lineage were also watching the battle. Seeing Zhang Yan use the heavy water again, Mengjin said, "Sun Shidi, just now I have seen this thing. I wasn't sure at first, but now that I look again, isn't it the serene heavy water that you used when you were young?" Sun Jinren's eyes brightened, nodded and said, "Senior brother is right, it is the serene heavy water. I didn't think that Zhang Yan would be able to cultivate this water to the level of complete heavenly cycle. He must have put in a lot of effort." After Zhang Yan calmed down, he pointed his finger, and the serene heavy water converged into a roaring tide. With the momentum of the tide, it charged toward Xiao Sha. Xiao Sha was not flustered. He made a hand seal and activated his Xian Qi. A faint golden radiance rose into the air. This light was as thin as a cicada's wing and looked like a thin gauze. It was faintly discernible. The halo was bright and indistinguishable. The heavy water arrived in a flash and collided with the light. Circles of ripples could be seen, like a drizzle in a pond. The ripples were endless and the light vibrated non-stop, sucking in a little bit of the heavy water. After the force was removed, the heavy water was bounced away drop by drop. This process was witnessed by every disciple. They saw it very clearly. Zhang Yan was not surprised by this result. He was just testing the waters. He made a hand seal and absorbed all the heavy water. Then he shouted again. Suddenly, a big yellow hand that was 300 feet in size jumped out from the top of the door. It reached down and grabbed Xiao Sha. Then, Xiao Sha disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, Xiao Sha's disciples were slightly flustered. The disciples in the field were even more shocked. But Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. There was no joy on his face. He couldn't help but praise in his heart. The other was worthy of being ranked 5th among the top 10 disciples. His ability was really amazing. Previously, he had used the mysterious yellow hand to capture many cultivators. No matter how strong they were, once they were in the palm of his hand, they were all crushed to death. However, this time was different. He felt that he wasn't grabbing a person, but a slippery but extremely tough bubble. No matter how much strength the hand exerted, it couldn't crush the bubble. Since this method couldn't hurt this person, then there was no need to use it. Zhang Yan shouted and withdrew the mysterious yellow hand. Xiao Sha was still standing there, unharmed. There was a slight smile on his face. There was no change in his expression. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Senior Xiao, be careful when you come down." His hand shook and a spiritual light flew out. The 5 spirits' white carp shuttle was taken out by him. The shuttle swayed its head and tail and rushed towards Xiao Sha to peck him. Facing the Xian Qi, Xiao Sha wasn't as relaxed as he was before. His face showed a bit of seriousness. He shouted in a low voice and his body trembled slightly. Rays of silver light shot out from his back and continuously hit the Xian Qi treasure. Under the repeated attacks, the spirit shuttle was pushed to the side. Originally, it was going to peck Xiao Sha, but the result was that it slid past him. The moment they brushed past each other, a light flashed in Xiao Ling's eyes. He stretched out his hand from his sleeve. Who would have thought that at this moment he would see a ray of light flying over? It was the flying banana. He secretly sighed and retracted his hand. According to his original plan, he was going to take this treasure that originally belonged to the Xiao clan and take it. Even if Zhang Yan wanted to take it back, he could use an excuse to hide it for a few days. After the large competition, he would return to his cave and there would be no need to pay attention to Zhang Yan. As long as he dragged it out for a year or so, he wouldn't be able to take it back. However, he didn't think that Zhang Yan would be so vigilant that he wouldn't give him any chance. He couldn't help but hate in his heart. After Zhang Yan took back the 5 spirits' white carp shuttle, he said in a clear voice, "Senior brother Zhao's cultivation is profound and your defense is marvelous. I admire you. There is no need to try again. This time, it is senior brother Zhao's turn." He waved his sleeves, took a few steps back and stood still. He actually had another method, which was to use the earth elemental true light to fight against Xiao Sha. The weight of this light was no less than a mountain. Once he used it, he didn't know what the consequences would be. However, he wasn't here to determine the winner, so there was no need to reveal his trump card. Thus, he simply gave up. Xiao Sha thought in his heart, "Today, I will let you see my supernatural power." He stared at Zhang Yan and circulated his qi around his body. His lips moved slightly. His lips moved slightly as if he was saying something to him. Zhang Yan suddenly felt a buzzing sound in his ears. At the same time, there wasn't a part of his body that wasn't shaking. Even his bones and muscles were trembling. It was as if his entire body was being hit by countless small hammers. However, his body was incomparably strong. This mere trembling couldn't do anything to him. It was like a cool breeze brushing against his face. At this moment, a few leaves flew over. Just now, when they arrived between the two of them, they seemed to have encountered an invisible barrier. In a split second, they turned into ashes. At first, everyone only saw the two of them standing there motionlessly. They didn't understand what was going on. After witnessing this scene, they suddenly realized something. Just now, they were shocked. It turned out that the two of them had been fighting for a long time. It was just that their killing intent was hidden, making it impossible for others to detect it. At this moment, Zhang Yan's Taoist robe fluttered even though there was no wind. If one took a closer look, they could see that there was a layer of essence qi circulating around his body. Even his head and face were protected by it. Xiao Sha saw that Zhang Yan had a treasured robe to protect him, so he wasn't surprised. If he didn't have a few treasures to protect himself, how would the latter dare to ask him to attack? Suddenly, the time it took to burn a stick of incense had passed. Xiao Sha seemed to be a little tired from continuously activating his supernatural powers. Seeing that Zhang Yan was still unaffected, his eyes flashed and he let out a long sigh. He shook his head and sighed, "Junior brother Zhang is also extraordinary. I can't do anything to you. How about we call this a draw?" Zhang Yan replied politely, "Of course. If I have time, I will ask senior brother Xiao for advice." Xiao Sha bowed to Zhang Yan and left leisurely. At this moment, Luo Yuanhua had already woken up. His face was slightly flushed. He sat on the ground with his hand on his chest. Seeing that Xiao Sha had returned to the peak, he couldn't help but wonder, if I didn't see wrongly, senior brother just now has obviously used the clear sound of 9 great mountains. Strange, this supernatural power is so powerful, how could it not injure Zhang Yan? Xiao Sha revealed a deep smile and suddenly asked, Junior brother Luo, do you know why Zhang Yan is so powerful? Luo Yuanhua was startled. His mouth moved, but he didn't answer. Xiao Sha stepped forward and patted his shoulder. He said in a deep voice, let me tell you. This person has only entered the sect for 20 years, but he has already achieved what he has today. It is really commendable, but it is also extremely terrifying. If we give him another 100 years, will you and I still be standing here? When he said the last sentence, his tone was fierce and his eyes were overflowing with killing intent. Luo Yuanhua's heart shivered. He asked tentatively, Senior brother, what do you mean? Xiao Sha took a deep breath and closed his eyes as if he was enduring something. He then opened his eyes again and said, even if we defeat this person today, he can still make a comeback after 24 years. Only by destroying his foundation can we completely eliminate this scourge. Let him be proud for a few years. When you see him again in the next competition, you will understand my intention today. He turned around, squinted his eyes at Zhang Yan, and sneered. A cultivator's body was the most precious thing. It was the basis of achieving Tao. During cultivation, there was no room for injury. His 9 great mountains voiceless sound was not only powerful, but it could also directly attack the internal organs and bones. It could hurt people invisibly. Because he had been studying this supernatural power for many years, he had figured out a trick that was not known to others. The most vicious part of this technique was to use this voiceless sound to pierce the opponent's internal organs. Moreover, it was to injure the opponent in an extremely subtle way, and then slowly destroy the internal body. At first, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with the injury. Even a nascent soul Taoist master wouldn't be able to discover it if they didn't look carefully. However, as time passed and the injury gradually worsened, it was already difficult to recover and the foundation was damaged. Using the supernatural power in this way was actually a great burden for Xiao Sha. He would need to go into seclusion for a few years to recuperate. However, in order to do it secretly, he had to do it. According to Xiao Sha's original plan, as long as he defeated Zhang Yan, it would be over. However, he found that even if he defeated this person once, it would be useless. This person could come again next time. Therefore, he did not hesitate to use up his own energy to destroy Zhang Yan's foundation. This was a slow and long process. If Zhang Yan did not suffer any serious injuries, he would not notice anything strange even after 20 years. When he truly discovered that something was wrong, even if Zhou Changju was an alchemist, he would not be able to save the situation. However, this plan of his was destined to land in vain. When Zhang Yan resisted the 9 great mountains' voiceless sound, on the surface, he was relying on the treasured clothing, but in reality, he was relying on his body that was as hard as metal. His internal organs had long been forged into one piece, hard to be injured by swords and knives. Even if there were some injuries, they would be healed along with the injury. He did not take it seriously at all. If Xiao Sha knew that he had painstakingly used up a lot of energy and secretly used a scheme, but in the end, it did not have the slightest effect on Zhang Yan, he would probably be so angry that he would vomit blood. Elder Sun looked at Zhang Yan and sighed. It seems that I have underestimated you. Zhang Yan, you can retreat. If you want, you can find martial nephew Xiao tomorrow to fight again. However, Zhang Yan smiled. His eyes flickered slightly. He turned the sword light around, but did not leave. Instead, he came directly to the bottom of the 4th peak. Looking up, he shouted at the peak, Duda, do you dare to come down and fight with me? Chapter 335. When the tens of thousands of disciples outside saw Zhang Yan suddenly challenge Duda, there was a sudden uproar. They were surprised at first, and then suddenly understood. They all thought that he was not convinced that he had a draw with Xiao Suo, so he wanted to win back a round from Duda. Even though many of the aristocratic family's disciples felt that he was overestimating himself, many of the masters and disciples felt a little excited in their hearts. Not to mention the fact that Zhang Yan had a draw with Xiao Suo just now. After he entered the arena, he had fought 3 people in a row, yet he did not show the slightest exhaustion and was still full of energy. It could be seen that his yuan qi was abundant, and his stamina was far above his peers. No wonder he was a first-grade Dan cultivator who could move 9 whales. Instantly, countless pairs of eyes followed closely behind him. However, Xiao Sha and the others were thinking about it even more deeply. They were all secretly pondering, trying to guess the true intention behind his actions. Luo Yuanhua covered his chest, coughed a few times, and said angrily, "Senior brother, if you didn't let Zhang Yan go just now, how could he escape from senior brother's hands? He even wants to challenge senior brother Du's position. He is really arrogant, too arrogant." Xiao Suo was surprised to see that his tone was so angry, which was different from his usual calm appearance. After pondering for a while, he immediately understood what Luo Yuanhua was thinking. It turned out that Luo Yuanhua was afraid that if Du won against Zhang Yan, it would seem that his side was at a disadvantage. In this way, he, the one who lost to Zhang Yan, would not be able to raise his head. Xiao Suo's face floated a trace of an unfathomable smile, and he said meaningfully, "Junior brother, don't worry. This is not a bad thing." He pointed again. I have already noticed it. This Zhang Yan has a treasured clothing to protect him. Let's just wait and see. If he is determined to be stable, senior brother Du may not be able to do anything to him." After Zhang Yan and Xiao Suo fought, he went to challenge Duda. It seemed hard to understand, but he had his own intentions. Previously, Ning Chongxian did not provoke others, but only targeted Su Wendian. He could see that with Ning Chongshuan's temper, he would not be able to defeat Su Wendian. This definitely wasn't his original intention, it was definitely the will of the few heaven-enlightened masters. Even with Sun Jinren's support, Ning Chongxian was still like this. It was obvious that he had his own concerns and bottom line. This bottom line was the general trend. Once they passed, they would have to bear the pressure of the Taoist grotto heaven behind those disciples. Although Zhang Yan had the support of Immortal Peng in this competition, the two sides only had a common interest. Immortal Peng could give him a push at the critical moment and help him rise to the top, but he might not be willing to take risks for him. Therefore, under these circumstances, it was better to seek a draw for the time being. Not only could he prove his strength, but he also wouldn't provoke the aristocratic families. This was the best option. However, it was a draw against one person. Although the process was the same, the result was completely different. His fight with Xiao Sa ended in a draw, but the two of them were gambling. Perhaps the disciples didn't think that Xiao Sa's real ability was better than Xiao Sa's. Since this number wasn't enough, he would just have to find another person. If he could fight evenly with Duda, who in the sect would dare to look down on him? Even if they didn't think that he could win against these two people, it was undeniable that his strength was enough to squeeze into the top 10 disciples. Duda sat on the peak and heard Zhang Yan's challenge. However, he didn't make a sound. His expression didn't show his joy or anger, but his eyes were slightly gloomy. He raised a hand that was as soft as a woman's and waved at Feng Zhen. Feng Zhen understood what he meant. Ever since he achieved the minor supernatural power, he always wanted to fight with Zhang Yan. At this moment, he got what he wanted. He stood up, bowed to Duda, and was about to go down the peak. Taoist Mo stood among the disciples. Seeing that he was leaving impatiently, he was afraid that he would make a mistake, so he said to his back, "Junior brother, be careful. Don't underestimate this person." Feng Zhen didn't seem to hear him. He didn't even turn his head, and hurriedly floated down the mountain. In the blink of an eye, he was at the bottom of the peak. He said proudly, "Zhang Yan, a junior like you doesn't need master to make a move. I can take care of you." Zhang Yan saw that it was Feng Zhen. Although he had only met this person once, he knew that this person had played tricks behind his back. This competition didn't allow killing, but it could make this person suffer. He smiled and said, "There's no use in arguing. Let's see who's the real deal." Feng Zhen sneered and glared at Zhang Yan. He circulated his Xian Qi, and in a split second, The fire in his chest boiled. Stimulated by the fire, his vision turned blood red. With a snort, he waved his sleeves. Immediately, a large ball of orange fire-black mist exploded from the top of his head. Within it, there were dazzling sparks that scattered like scattered stars. Black and red intertwined with each other, twisting and stirring. Like a pillar of smoke, it shot straight up, climbing higher and higher. In a flash, it was more than 1,000 feet, as if it was going to shoot through the clouds. At this moment, there was another explosion, and the pillar of smoke exploded. In just a few breaths of time, there was a thick black and red cloud that covered the sky. It stretched out for a few miles, and even the light of the moon was obscured. Feng Zhen laughed, and with a leap he went into this fog and disappeared in the blink of an eye. When he made such a scene, the disciples present were shocked. They didn't expect him to have such a method. Those who didn't know him started to ask about his history. Zhang Yan looked at the thick smoke and pondered for a moment. He raised his finger and pointed, sending a sword light into it to probe. After the sword pellet went one round in the smoke, under the observation of the mind's eye, it was a vast expanse of gray. He couldn't find a trace of the person. It was obvious that this technique of his could cover his tracks. Since he couldn't find him, he didn't insist. With a thought, the sword pellet returned to the heart of his brows. At this moment, there was a ripple in the smoke, as if there was a hand stirring it. Then, Feng Zhen's figure appeared from within, but it was only half hidden. It was so shallow that even his figure couldn't be seen clearly. Only his voice could be heard. Zhang Yan, no matter how amazing your sword skills and talisman are, let's see how you can harm me. He shouted loudly. In an instant, the thick smoke trembled, and countless sparks fell down one after another. Even though Zhang Yan had the protection of his treasured clothes, he didn't need to force himself to take on this technique when he didn't need to. He rode on the sword light and transformed into a flowing light, easily dodging it. However, those sparks didn't seem to be willing to let him go. They chased after him. However, he left very quickly, and they couldn't touch him at all. Feng Zhen popped his head out from the smoke, and a circle of fire gradually floated up at the corner of his eyes, making his face look sinister. Even his emotions became agitated, and he laughed wildly. Zhang Yan, go ahead and hide, let's see where you can hide to. He made a hand seal, and the sparks stopped dancing. Instead, they crackled and exploded continuously like firecrackers. They exploded continuously like firecrackers, resounding through the sky. Everywhere the sound passed, there was another patch of smoke and fog. But even then, he seemed to be unwilling to stop, and he repeatedly muttered as the seals in his hands changed ceaselessly. Sounds of explosions resounded out without end, and it seemed as if the furnace had exploded, causing loud rumbling sounds to resound out. Bits of flame fluttered about while blazing hot air overflowed in all directions, and it ceaselessly invaded space. It dyed this part of the world red, as if it was burning charcoal. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before he could turn the area within a few miles into a land of turbid fire and haze. After Feng Zhen activated this technique, he felt his whole body burning, as if he wanted to destroy everything in front of him. His mind became more and more muddled. He saw that the sword light that Zhang Yan controlled kept shuttling through the sparks, and he thought that he had the upper hand. He couldn't help but feel proud, and he felt that the technique that Dude gave him was quite marvelous. Even Zhang Yan wasn't his opponent. In the future, he could rely on this technique to dominate his peers. This little technique of his was actually commendable. It could unleash the power of his Dan Fiend to the extreme, and he could even fight against a second-stage core transformation cultivator. However, if he really fought against the latter, there would be many changes. But it might not be able to suppress him. If a first-stage core transformation cultivator didn't open his aperture, he wouldn't be able to completely transform the power of the Dan Fiend in his body into mana. It would be good if he could get 50 to 60% of it. Therefore, after reaching the second stage, the mana that a cultivator could control would almost double, far surpassing that of a first-stage core transformation cultivator. However, although this little technique of his could not increase his cultivation, it could transfer the Dan Fiend in his abdomen to the outside world. He could use a talisman to guide the qi and lock it in place, preventing it from dissipating and allowing it to come and go as he pleased. Many of the techniques that he couldn't use because he didn't have enough cultivation could now be used with just a thought. In the blink of an eye, he had the power of a second-stage core transformation cultivator. How could he not be excited? Zhang Yan's escape light flew erratically, constantly dodging the sparks coming from the fire cloud, but he was not in a hurry to make a move. Although Feng Zhen's technique was powerful and his real body could be hidden, making it difficult for others to find him easily, Zhang Yan was experienced and knowledgeable, so he couldn't scare him. He just controlled his sword and moved around while looking for a flaw. He thought that Feng Zhen was the same as him, only a first-stage core transformation cultivator. His foundation was not stable, so there must be a flaw to be able to create such a big scene. As long as he found the right medicine and the key point, there would be a way to break it. In the end, his eyes were sharp. After circling around the scene a few times, he quickly found something strange. Although the sparks kept exploding, only smoke was left in its original spot. Wisps of essence qi returned to the large patch of smoke and fire, and only after a while would there be sparks again. Obviously, this technique couldn't be used unscrupulously. It probably couldn't tolerate any damage, so he was stingy with the essence qi. Since that was the case, all he needed to do was to find the right medicine. Zhang Yan pondered for a while, smiled and came up with an idea. He activated a technique from the Billowing Cloud secret manual. Instantly, thick clouds of fog gushed out from under his feet, and in an instant, the surroundings were covered in a vast expanse of whiteness. When he fought with Wang Pan in the past, he was able to use this technique to cover a radius of 1,000 feet, making it so that no one could see anything. Now, he used the full power of the Dan transformation technique. In an instant, the fog rolled and the field was covered in dust. His momentum was even more magnificent. Not long after, thick fog rose from the foot of the 10 peaks. It floated around, dense and chaotic, and the spiritual light was dim, covering the stars and the moon. Zhang Yan's original intention was to use the fog to cover himself, and then use the true water light to cut off the smoke and fire, so that no one would be able to see through his technique. However, after he dispersed the fog, he suddenly had a strong feeling in his heart, as if telling him that something was missing from the cloud. This feeling attacked him from time to time, anxiously urging him to do something. He frowned slightly and thought for a moment. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind, and he immediately understood the reason. With a long laugh, he shouted and released the 365 drops of heavy Yin water. As soon as the drops of heavy Yin water were released, without waiting for the activation of the technique, as if they were ordered, they all dispersed into the white fog. Each of them occupied a place within the fog, and arranged themselves in different directions. Zhang Yan took a deep breath and activated the technique. In an instant, the 365 drops of heavy Yin water were connected to each other, and vibrated simultaneously. There were actually streaks of lightning that were like golden snakes slithering under the fog, and there were rumbling sounds of thunder. Sitting on the cloud, Taoist Master Sun let out a cry of surprise, his face revealing a hint of surprise. Chapter 336. Zhang Yan only felt a mysterious feeling swimming into his mind, as if there was something more. With a slight movement of his mind, he could go to every corner of this cloud mist. The minute details were all vivid in his mind, and the wonders of the changes were all clear in his heart. Previously, he only used the serene in heavy water as an inanimate object, and did not pay too much attention to it. But now, once the heavy water entered the cloud mist, it was like a fish in water and came to life. They were closely connected to each other, and as they rotated and rolled, they emitted buzzing and rumbling sounds. From time to time, bolts of lightning and fire would flash through the mist, and within a few kilometers, there were flickering golden snakes that came and went without end, and they were like shuttles that flew about. Looking from afar, one could see that in this piece of heaven and earth, below the valley was a vast mist that was shaped like a white wall wrapped in pink smoke, with electric currents curling around it, giving out crackling sounds of thunder. Above it, however, was a fiery cloud that was filled with flames, heat waves, and smoke. The disciples outside originally saw that Zhang Yan was dodging left and right in the midst of the smoke and fire, and those who were less knowledgeable thought that he was at a disadvantage. Who knew that in the blink of an eye, he would actually create such a scene? Looking at this flying cloud mist, it could be said to be the momentum of the heavens, and they were instantly stunned. Zhang Yan sat down in this misty cloud mist and carefully experienced it. Without the need for words, there were all kinds of wonderful comprehensions flowing through his heart, as if with a flip of his hand he could gather the clouds to create lightning, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "Wonderful!" Raising his hand, he lightly conjured a technique. Using his true power, his wide robe sleeves swayed slightly. Just this one movement seemed to have startled some huge ferocious beast. With a rumbling sound, the entire huge cloud moved together, stirring up a cyclone of wind, rumbling as it rose upwards. Feng Zhen saw that Zhang Yan suddenly created a vast cloud mist and couldn't help but be stunned. Looking at the momentum, it could even suppress him by a head. When he saw Chen Shi brazenly pressing over and seeming to intend to go head-on against him, he couldn't help but feel slightly fearful when he recalled the various formidable abilities Zhang Yan possessed earlier. But at this moment, he didn't have any path of retreat, and he could only brace himself and charge forward. Gritting his teeth, he exhaled loudly and passed through the ball of fire and smoke, landing on top of it. Then, he bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a few mouthfuls of blood essence. The fire seemed to burn even more vigorously. Following that, he gathered all the mana in his body and circulated this divine ability with all his might. Finally, he pressed down with his hand. The smoke cloud below him seemed to be carrying a weight of 10,000 kilograms. It suddenly sank and pressed down with all his might. Zhang Yan smiled. His fingers formed a seal, and the 365 drops of serene heavy water in the cloud below him started to spin. With a clap of thunder, dozens of bolts of lightning shot up. In the dark night, there seemed to be countless golden snakes dancing in the air. They devoured the black and red smoke, immediately cutting off a layer of its essence. Feng Zhen's heart instantly trembled, as if the lightning had struck his body. Along with the lightning flying around and killing, the originally thick ball of black smoke and fire was being bitten off. Not long later, it was like a leaking bag riddled with holes. Looking from the outside, the two smoke clouds hadn't even collided yet, but the black cloud above them was already losing pieces by pieces. It continued to collapse, as if it wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Feng Zhen was terrified. Zhang Yan's actions were obviously trying to grind away the external cultivation that he had painstakingly cultivated for dozens of years. Using this vengeful energy outside could allow him to use many exquisite methods, but it wasn't without a price. This was something he had entrusted his own essence energy to. If it was completely cut off, then what was the difference between that and having his cultivation crippled? However, after the spark fell into the cloud, it was like a stone sinking into the ocean. There was no trace of it, and it couldn't even cause a ripple. Seeing that the other party was doing this, but he could only watch without being able to stop it, Feng Zhen's heart was bleeding. He knew that this time, he wouldn't be able to get away with it. His thoughts turned, and he desperately tried to absorb it, trying to retrieve a portion of the dissipating essence energy. At least he would be able to preserve some of his strength. However, this technique was easy to use, but difficult to retrieve. This was the first time he had used this divine ability after he had mastered it. If he had practiced it with Taoist Mo before he came here, he would know that when he withdrew this technique into his body, he would need to find a secluded place to rub his Jindan for an hour, and then slowly move it. Only then would he be able to gather all the essence qi. How could he do this in such a short time? After realizing this, Feng Zhen's heart instantly panicked, and he felt that things weren't looking good. At this moment his aura was weak, but it was keenly sensed by Zhang Yan. He immediately grasped this opportunity, and the first-grade Jindan in his abdomen began to revolve, and with a surge of vengeful energy, the 365 drops of heavy water shook together. The thick cloud layer seemed to be pulled by something, and suddenly pulled upwards, and directly collided with the smoke hanging above. There was an earth-shattering sound, and the two clouds instantly collided. At this moment, the surrounding disciples felt the mountains tremble, and the sound reverberated again and again. A whirlwind appeared out of nowhere, and it was so strong that it stuck to their clothes, and their hair flew. Countless fine grains of sand floated around, and they needed to use Xian Qi in order to keep it out of their bodies. At this moment, thunder and lightning flashed in the sky, and after this rumbling sound, Feng Zhen's entire cloud of smoke had already been blasted apart. The ashes of the shop scattered into dust, and black cotton fluttered in the air, completely scattering like stars and clouds. However, the misty white fog below did not move in the slightest, and it was easy to tell which one was higher and which one was lower. However, Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Feng Zhen's cloud of smoke had collapsed so quickly, and this was not entirely his doing, but because the other party suddenly took the initiative to disperse the smoke at the critical moment. Feng Zhen's action was also because he had no other choice. The more that cloud of smoke was worn away, the weaker he became. But the strange thing was, at this moment, his mind was much clearer than before. At the last moment, he also hardened his heart, and endured the pain to disperse the talisman that maintained the supernatural power. Once this talisman was gone, it was equivalent to 3 years of hard work turning into nothing. In the future, even if he wanted to cultivate it again, the power would not be as great as before, but compared to having his entire body's cultivation crippled, it was much better. Although his vitality was greatly damaged, he was able to break free from this cultivation method, and he did not have to pay for it with his life savings. At this moment, he did not care about anything else, and desperately swallowed and absorbed the essence that was floating in all directions. This essence was the foundation of cultivating the evil spirit of the pill, and ordinary cultivators would hide it deep within their golden cores, and would not easily use it. If too much of one's essence was lost, then their cultivation would definitely plummet, and they would need to nourish their golden cores, using tens of years to recuperate. Just now, they could slowly recover. But because he was using the supernatural power, almost all of his essence was transferred outside of his body. Thus, he was anxious now, and flew everywhere on the smoke, hoping to take back as much as he could. Zhang Yan's figure was hidden in the clouds, and he looked at his actions coldly. How could he allow him to do as he pleased, and let him take in the essence? He urged the dark heavy water, and immediately, bolts of lightning shot out, shuttling back and forth in the air, hitting the balls of essence into nothingness, and in the blink of an eye, a large area was swept away. Feng Zhen's eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and he almost vomited blood. But he also knew that he had no strength to contend with Zhang Yan, and could only bite the bullet. As he cursed fiercely at Zhang Yan, he gloomily absorbed the remaining essence. Zhang Yan's fingers secretly pointed under the sleeve of his robe, and a strand of piercing qi mixed into the essence. Feng Zhen was anxious to absorb it, and did not notice, and absorbed it into his body. Zhang Yan smiled slightly. This strange qi was formed from his pill evil spirit, and this was a technique of concealing one's qi from this true freedom chapter. If it was not expelled in time, it would sneak into the internal organs, and gradually seep into the meridians and apertures. At first, Feng Zhen was nursing his Jindan, so he probably did not notice it. When his cultivation gradually recovered, and he circulated his cultivation again, although it might not be harmful, he would definitely feel unbearable pain in his body, and it would be difficult for him to control his qi. At this time, it would be difficult to get rid of this qi, unless he could ask the elders of the sect to help, but it would be like adding snow to snow, and he would have to grind away a layer of his cultivation before he could completely expel it. Zhang Yan was well aware that under the gazes of everyone, he could at most only use this kind of trick. In the future, when he sat on the position of one of the top 10 disciples, he would have ways to deal with this person. So he temporarily did not bother with him, and only dispersed the mist, and called back the dark heavy water. He silently inspected his body, and with this inspection he felt slightly surprised. The dark heavy water seemed to have shrunk, and it seemed to have been consumed quite a bit. After thinking for a while, he did not take it to heart. Even if the dark heavy water was damaged, he only needed to find a cold and secluded deep ravine, and then refine it back. This heavy water was something he had been forced to cultivate in the Netherworld River when he was looking for the Devil's Trove. But now his cave abode was the cave abode of the heavenly lake of bright nether, and it was known to lead directly to the netherworld. Once he went to the depths of the lake, there would be nothing to worry about. Elder Sun smiled at the side and glanced at the fourth peak. Then he moved forward with sword light and stood between the two of them. He pointed at Feng Zhen, whose face was ashen and bloodless, and scolded, "Feng Zhen, you've lost this round, why don't you quickly retreat?" Feng Zhen still had some remaining essence qi that he had not collected. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but a hint of displeasure appeared on Elder Sun's face. He puffed his cheeks and blew at him. In an instant, a cool breeze pulled Feng Zhen, and in the blink of an eye, he was sent back to the peak. However, when he landed, the cool breeze suddenly dispersed, and he was left behind. Feng Zhen was already very weak. Caught off guard, he lost his footing and instantly fell to the ground in a sorry state. Priest Mo hurried forward to help him up and said in a low voice, "Quickly stand up, be careful of teacher's punishment." Feng Zhen's face paled, and he struggled to get up, but his whole body was swaying, as if he could collapse at any time. But Duda did not pay attention to him. He sat there and seemed to be deep in thought. After a long time, he asked the boy holding the furnace beside him, "What time is it?" The boy bowed and answered, "Reporting to Master, it is already the time of the day, and there are still 2 hours until midnight." Duda made a sound of acknowledgement and did not deny it. He first swept his gaze over the disciples, and then with a shake of his sleeve, he turned into a stream of green smoke and flew down from the peak. In an instant, he was already standing in front of Zhang Yan, and with his hands behind his back, he said indifferently, "Zhang Yan, make your move." Chapter 337. Zhang Yan was straightforward and did not bother to exchange pleasantries with Duda. He drove his sword to an advantageous position and held the sword technique with his fingers. With a single thought, he shot out a sharp sword light that turned into a rainbow. He was still using his flying sword to test the waters. Duda's face was indifferent. He rubbed his hands together and a wisp of smoke flew out from between his fingers. It was thin and about the thickness of a finger. Like a snake, it swiftly shot out and collided with the sword light from a distance of 50 feet and stopped it. Seeing that the sword light couldn't land, Zhang Yan didn't persist. After calculating the distance between them, he gave a loud shout and the sword pellet was controlled by his god's will. With a tremble, 16 smooth and flawless sword lights leaped out like a string of broken beads. They shone brightly in the sky and overflowed with cold air. 16 swords in one breath. Luo Yuanhua watched from afar with a complicated gaze. Just now, he heard that Zhang Yan had some attainments in swordsmanship. Thus, he wanted to force Zhang Yan to fight with him, especially the 16 light separation and reunion swords, which was hard to come by. He could only split into 12 sword lights. Thus, he wanted to see how his swordsmanship was better than Lu Cheng's. However, Lu Cheng did not give him the chance. After the 16 sword lights dispersed, they did not fly as fast as usual. Instead, they circled around Duda and spat out sharp sword lights. It was bone-chilling and intimidating. Although Duda did not have any expression on his face, there was a hint of caution in his eyes. The wisp of smoke flew out even further. When it reached 70 to 80 feet away, it circled back and forth, protecting the 4 sides without leaving any flaws. The 16 sword lights were like 16 heart's eyes that wandered around in the surroundings. So long as the slightest flaw was found, it would tear through the sky and slash over. After that, the remaining sword lights would attack together. Once the defender was killed, he would be entangled by the sword moves that were like a torrential downpour. At that time, it would be extremely difficult to turn the situation around. If it was a disciple who did not know the ins and outs of the situation, he would be flustered. Encountering such a technique, he would inevitably be flustered, unable to attend to one thing and lose sight of another. However, Duda was able to sit here today because he had experienced hundreds of battles. He had fought with many sword cultivators and naturally knew how to deal with them. These 16 sword lights were all the same. However, everyone had their own choices. Some were strong, some were weak. Even someone like Luo Yuanhua, who had immersed himself in swordsmanship for a long time, couldn't display its full power. Moreover, he had to stand in one place when executing it, and his mind couldn't be distracted in the slightest. According to the usual method, he only needed to guard carefully. If he wasn't confused by the sword light, he would definitely be able to defend. When the other party's aura weakened slightly. However, finding an opportunity to counterattack would have a miraculous effect. However, Duda was one of the top 10 disciples. Once he was forced into a disadvantageous position, even if it was only for a short period of time, it would be enough to make him lose a lot of face. Thus, he did not choose this method. His lips curled into a cold smile, causing the smoke to fly even faster. It seemed to be dancing non-stop. He stood there silently, making a spell with one hand. Not long later, a wisp of white smoke was spat out from his nose. He exhaled a wisp of white smoke from his nostrils and gathered on top of his head. There was a faint green spark within the smoke, and it released a bright light. It was like a candle hanging on top of his head, dispelling the haze in the dark night and illuminating an area of 50 feet around him. Xiao Sha, who was watching the battle from the peak, patted the armrest and squinted. "Oh, is it the green chi white jade lamp? I didn't expect Senior Brother Du to use a magical treasure to fight. He really thinks highly of Zhang Yan." This light flashed, shooting out beams of flying light at the sword orbs that were circling around. As long as the light shone on the sword orbs, they would encounter a huge resistance, like they were stuck in a sticky paste. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect the other party to use a magical treasure so quickly. It was obvious that he was going to fight seriously. Thinking of this, he became spirited. He made a spell and brought out the yellow giant hand from the top of the door. He aimed at the flickering light and slapped it down. This giant hand was activated by him with all his strength, and in the blink of an eye, it expanded to 1,000 feet in size, like a small mountain slowly pressing down. Zhang Yan smiled. He was sure that Duda wouldn't dodge. When Xiao Sha faced this giant hand, he could do anything he wanted, and Duda was ranked higher than Xiao Sha. If he dodged, wouldn't he be admitting that he was inferior? Sure enough, Duda's eyes sharpened and he focused his attention. He activated the lamp on top of his head and a jade-colored flame appeared. It was like a blooming lotus, shining brightly. With a whooshing sound, the flame rose up and actually firmly blocked the mysterious yellow hand. This was what Zhang Yan wanted. He let out a long laugh, and unbridled to his heart's content. He stimulated the pill evil chi in his abdomen, causing the giant hand to become heavier, bigger, and bigger. It kept expanding, as if it wanted to press down on him. Just now, it wasn't going to stop. At the same time, he urged his mind, and like a shower of rain, a dense sword light shot out. He didn't follow any rules or routines, and just attacked the protective light without any care. These two attacks surrounded Duda, and also stimulated the light on top of his head to flicker incessantly, sometimes dimming, as if it was swaying in the wind. In the eyes of outsiders, at this moment, Zhang Yan's attack had suppressed him. Duda's thin lips tightened, and the coldness in his eyes intensified. He snorted and waved his big sleeve. An orange-red flying flame suddenly flew out, and with a loud bang, the yellow giant hand was smashed. Even the 16 sword lights seemed to be pushed by a huge force, and bounced 1,000 feet away. In mid-air, there was a yellow mist, which blocked the vision of the disciples outside the valley. For a moment, the disciples outside the valley couldn't see the two figures. Xiao Sha stood up from his seat, took 2 steps forward, looked down, and said with great interest, "It's rare to see Senior Brother Du so serious. There's a good show to watch." Seeing that Duda easily resolved the attack, Zhang Yan wasn't surprised, and instead smiled lightly. This was also expected. Duda was ranked 4th among the top 10 disciples, and the cultivation method he practiced was one of the 5 Gong and 3 scriptures, called Red Sky Lucky Jade Book. It was also a powerful method, and it would be strange if he was easily suppressed by Duda. He took half a step back, and with a technique, the yellow mist in the sky gathered together, and in an instant, the yellow giant hand was gathered again, and the scattered sword lights also gathered together and returned to his arms. He pondered for a moment. This person used a magical treasure to protect himself, and even the swift sword lights just now couldn't do anything to him. I need to use another method to fight. While he was thinking, he suddenly felt a hot wind and knew something was wrong. He tilted his head slightly and saw a burning smoke brushing past his ear, and a light red mark was left on his cheek, but it dimmed in an instant, and not long after, it completely disappeared. After the smoke flew out, it left behind a brilliant rainbow behind it. It was incomparably gorgeous, and after circling in the air once, it flew back again. Zhang Yan's expression didn't change, and the yellow giant hand on top of him blocked downwards. Who knew that the smoke was so nimble, it turned around in the air, passed through the gap between his fingers, and went straight for his face. He pressed his hand down and the sword striking pill was shaken up. In a flash, he was already on top of the flying smoke. A muffled sound was heard and a lot of the smoke on the opposite side dissipated, revealing its true appearance. It was actually a 3 cun long iron arrow that was completely black and shiny. However, the tail feather was a ball of fire that burned incessantly. Light and smoke shot out and made swishing sounds. Before coming to this competition, Zhang Yan had some understanding of the top 10 disciples, and even though it wasn't detailed, he knew a thing or two about this thing. This thing was called 1,000 Miles Flying Flame Arrow, and like the sword pill in his hand, it was a treasure that Duda carried with him to fight, and the other top 10 disciples rarely saw it. Once this thing appeared, whether Duda admitted it or not, he saw Zhang Yan as an opponent that could fight him. But at this moment, even though the flying flame arrow in front of him was blocked by Zhang Yan, there was another flying arrow coming from behind him without a sound. The flying sword in Zhang Yan's hand was one with his mind, and with his mind's eye, he could see the scenery in all directions, so he naturally couldn't sneak attack. He smiled slightly, and his body turned into a rainbow, and instantly avoided this flying arrow. But this thing seemed to be unwilling to give up, and it continued to chase after him, its tail drawing colorful smoke trails in the air, extremely dazzling. After dodging a few rounds, Zhang Yan made up his mind, and the battle between him and Duda was different from normal battles. Even though he didn't want to win, he couldn't appear weak, and if he kept dodging, it would cause the other disciples to look down on him. Therefore, he didn't use his flying sword, but instead used his Xian Qi, and shook his Jin Dan. From the top of his head, a ray of Dan Fiend flew out, and like surfing on the shore, it collided with the flying arrow, and with a boom, it actually sent the arrow flying. When the disciples outside saw this scene, they all cried out in surprise. To know that the 1,000-mile flying flame arrow was a first-class treasure, and yet Zhang Yan used pure Dan Fiend energy to knock it away. Even though they already knew that the Dan was of the first realm, and its strength was great, seeing it with their own eyes was too shocking. Above the clouds, Master Meng and Master Sun looked at each other, a little emotional. A first-realm Dan was, after all, blessed by the heavens and rarely seen since ancient times. If it was anyone else, how could they do this? How could they dare to do this? Actually, if one thought about it carefully, this move was not worth it. Zhang Yan originally didn't need to use Dan Fiend energy, he only needed to use his flying sword to block, and it would be much easier. But his goal was different, and naturally, his method of fighting was different. Today, he wanted to let the masters on the clouds know his ability. Using a flying sword to fight against an enemy? How could it be compared to using a Dan Fiend energy to defend against an enemy? Plus, he had a lot of Dan Fiend energy in his stomach, so he didn't need to worry about the details. Just then, suddenly, there was a flash of light in the sky. Zhang Yan looked around and saw that in all directions, there were dozens of flying flame arrows. For a moment, the air was filled with hot flames and smoke. There was more than 1,000-mile flying flame arrow. There were 36 of them in total. Though they couldn't be used like flying swords, they could be used to set up an array. It was as if the scene in front of him was because Duda knew about his ability to escape. Just now, he was only using 1 or 2 flying flame arrows to restrain him. Then he set up an array to trap Ling Xian and cut off his escape route. Because of this, Duda could control the situation of the battle as he pleased. Seeing this, Zhang Yan couldn't help but laugh. He said, "I fought until now, but I didn't expect Senior Du to be so sincere. Since that's the case, I can't hide anything." He mustered his spirit and let out a roar. His joints all over his body crackled. On the 10th peak mountain, the sound of crashing tides could be heard, as if the Milky Way was overturning and the torrents were flooding the land. From behind him, a ray of watercolored brilliance rose up. Chapter 338. As soon as the great mystery true light appeared, the vigorous and abundant aura had already gushed out in a mighty manner. All the disciples of the Dark Azure sect who were spectating the battle were astonished, and they all secretly inquired about it, asking which divine ability this was from within the sect that actually had such a mighty aura. Duda also seemed to be aware that the situation was not right. Of course, he would not sit and watch Zhang Yan use his method. His fingers formed a seal and he shouted. He activated the flying flame arrow array that was surrounding them. Immediately, thousands of flying flame arrows flashed out and shot towards Zhang Yan. As the arrow flew, it whistled through the air with a sharp and ear-piercing sound. Smoke was left behind it, and its momentum was especially shocking. In the Zhao Yu Immortal Cave, every time Zhang Yan used the water element true light, he always left some leeway. But now that the surroundings were empty, he no longer had such scruples. He let out a long roar and displayed the water element true light to its fullest. This water light curtain suddenly expanded to a length of hundreds of feet. It was as if there were countless rivers and waves flowing within it. It was transparent and dazzling. The color of the sunset was also pushed back half of the sky. He saw the sky full of flying arrows, densely covering the sky. He used the water element true light to sweep across. In a flash, the thousands of fire arrows fell into the boundless water, like a stone thrown into the sea, and disappeared without a trace. However, as long as the flying flame arrows were spread out in all directions, the arrow fire would never stop. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered and he shouted again. The water light behind him suddenly grew, and with a rumbling sound, it was like a river flowing in reverse. In an instant, it wrapped around the flying flame arrows, and in the blink of an eye, it floated away. Duda frowned slightly when he saw that the aqua-colored light curtain had collected all the flying flame arrows. His fingers formed a seal. He wanted to take it back, but he felt that his mind was cut off. He coldly snorted and flicked his sleeve, abandoning this action. This 1,000 miles flying flame arrow was personally made by him. Without his mana to control it, no one could use it. It was not a big deal if he lost it. At most, he could just refine another one. However, he did not know what kind of supernatural power Zhang Yan was using with this water curtain. He was actually able to cause the arrow formation to fail. His eyes flickered as he raised his hand and clapped. 100 balls of clear light flew out. This fire was different from ordinary alchemy fires. The flames were plain and clean. It was as big as a silver basin, like the moon reflected in the water. It was cold and oppressive. If the flying flame fiery arrow was yang fire, then this was yin fire. As long as one touched it, it could even burn a layer of water. However, when the ball of clear fire landed on the water element true light, it was like a moth flying into a flame. The water curtain didn't even shake and flashed past. All of the yin flames were engulfed. The force of the water rose again, and water fell from the sky. Seeing that the yin fire had failed, Duda's expression was still calm. His snow-white robe fluttered in the wind. With a slight tilt, he floated backwards and rode a cloud of smoke 1,000 feet away. He softly chanted a few incantations. He reached out his hand and scooped at the air in front of his chest. He sucked in a stream of fire. Then he circulated his mana and activated it. There was a muffled buzzing sound. Within a 5-mile radius, countless lines of fire were ignited. Each line connected and in a moment, it covered the entire area. Zhang Yan raised his head and saw that the entire area was covered by layers upon layers of fire weaved around him. Counting carefully, there were actually 9 layers. The fire spread out and intertwined with each other. It was as if the sky was lit up. Even the 10 Peaks mountain was lit up by the fire. Despite being suddenly surrounded, he was still calm and did not panic. He shook his body and flew to the first layer of fire net. He activated the water element true light and fell forward without a care. But the strange thing was that after the water light passed, the fire net was still blocking his way like before. It was as if it had not moved at all. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He did not try to force his way through. Instead, he stopped and circled around, wondering what kind of fire this was. Xiao stood on the peak and looked at the vast fire. He exclaimed in admiration, "It's the Four Wild Hearts fire net? Du Shixiang is good at scheming." Just now, the thousandly flying flame arrow formation is only used to confuse Zhang Yan. The four symbols fire shield was also a rare treasure. When used, it would not be released, but hidden within the heart aperture. The fire within the shield was emitted from the heart. This fire could be big or small, more or less depending on one's thoughts. It could form a 9-layered net, trapping or defending. As long as the person controlling it did not die, it would not be destroyed. Although this treasure could trap people, it needed to be fed drop by drop of heart blood when it was used against the enemy. This was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Therefore, other methods were needed to delay it for a while before it could be used smoothly. Due to using this treasure at this moment showed that he had secretly prepared for a long time. Luo Yuanhua said in a low voice, "I also know the secret of this fire. But I see that Zhang Yan's mind is especially firm. If we force our way through, I'm afraid he will not be able to do anything." Xiao shook his head and smiled while stroking his beard. "Junior brother, you are wrong. It is because Du Shixiang saw that Zhang Yan has many tricks up his sleeves and knew that it would be difficult to deal with him. Just now Duda is using this treasure. If I were him, I would only hope to delay this person for a while. After that, I will definitely have a backup plan to defeat the enemy in one move." Zhang Yan circled around and tried a few more times. He also understood the origin of this fire. If this fire was not formed by the evil pill, then it must be the legendary heart fire. Although he had never seen it before, he had long heard of its name. However, this kind of fire did not harm the body or burn the internal organs. But it could cause distracting thoughts and disturb the mind. If one could not control it, illusions would appear in front of one's eyes and one would lose oneself. However, a person with a firm mind and a clear mind could boldly charge in. However, when the fire was too much, one needed to calm down and not have the slightest hesitation or panic. If one encountered an enemy who was waiting for an opportunity to attack, it would be difficult to deal with. Zhang Yan's mind changed. Like Xiao Suo, he also understood Duda's purpose. After thinking for a while, he decided not to force his way out. Instead, he fixed the spell and waited for the opponent's next move. Duda's eyes were fixed on Zhang Yan. His eyes were deep and bottomless. No one saw him move, but he gently blew a breath of air in front of him. Zhang Yan was on high alert, but he didn't see any movement. While he was surprised, he saw a flame suddenly appear in front of him. He lowered his head and saw that a layer of fire had appeared on his body. It stuck to him and didn't burn. The treasured clothes on his body also released a ray of light, isolating the fire 5 inches away. From an outsider's point of view, he was surrounded by a ball of golden fire. It was as if he was on fire. "Oh no!" Seeing the scene in the mirror, Qi Mingjiao also cried out in alarm. The Wang sisters had already been frightened many times today. At this moment, hearing this, they could not help but timidly say, "Senior sister." Qi Mingjiao looked at the ball of fire. Her eyes showed that she could not bear to see it. She said in a low voice, "This spell is one of the 12 magical powers of the sect. It is called the White Three Yang Qi. Very few people in the sect can successfully practice this spell. Once this magical power is mastered, the Yang Qi that is emitted can be said to burn everything. Even if a magic treasure is attached to it, if there is no fire extinguishing method, it can still burn through it until it is completely destroyed and turned into a pile of ashes. Just now, let it go." Hearing that this spell was so powerful, the two sisters could not help but turn pale. Wang Kaiwei said with some lack of confidence, "I think teacher has a way to resist it." Qi Mingjiao sighed. As she watched the flames burn more and more fiercely, she did not look favorably upon Zhang Yan. She turned around and saw Lu Yenyi standing there silently as if she was not anxious in the slightest, so she couldn't help but ask, "Junior sister, could it be that you don't know?" Lu Yenyi shook her head lightly and pointed at Elder Sun at the side. She said, "It isn't like that. Senior sister, look, This technique is so powerful. If teacher is unable to endure it, then how could that elder of the sect sit idly by and do nothing? Qi Mingjiao and the Wang sisters couldn't help but look over. Sure enough, Elder Sun was calm and composed, unperturbed, and did not seem anxious in the slightest. All the girls thought in their hearts and felt that Lu Yenni's words made sense. Even though injuries couldn't be avoided during the competition of the sect, it didn't allow a disciple's life to be in danger. Based on the current situation, since Elder Sun was so composed, it meant that Zhang Yan was at least not in any danger, and their hearts calmed down slightly. When Zhang Yan saw that the fire seemed to stick to his body, it burned fiercely and did not extinguish. After a few breaths of time, the light on his treasured robe actually retreated a little, as if it had been burned away. After thinking about it carefully in his mind, he guessed its origin. He couldn't help but mutter to himself with a smile, "I've often heard of the fame of this fire, but I didn't expect it to be like this." With a thought, he used the water element true light to wash away most of the fire, and only a few sparks remained. But in the blink of an eye, the sparks were like a prairie fire, and once again spread throughout his body. Zhang Yan tried a few times and found that it was the same every time. As long as there was a spark left, the fire could be reignited. He shook his head and simply ignored it. He used his Fa Li, and the light on the treasured robe instantly pushed outwards, forcing the yang fire 10 feet away. He silently calculated in his mind, and found that there were only 2 hours left until the end of the competition. He smiled and did not try to extinguish the fire, but let it wreak havoc outside. He sat on the cloud, closed his eyes, and held his breath without saying a word. At this moment, in the sky above the clouds, Sun Jinren frowned, and his face showed that he was unhappy with Duda's use of this supernatural power. Seeing that Zhang Yan had been in the fire for a long time, he moved his fingers, as if he was about to make a move. Meng Zhen looked up and said in a low voice, "Junior apprentice brother, don't be impatient. It's not appropriate for us to interfere, it's better to wait and see." Sun Jinren nodded and stopped his action. After a long time, the sound of a bell could be heard from the horizon. Elder Sun, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately rushed forward and said to Duda in a low voice, "It's midnight. Nephew Du, stop your supernatural power, and it won't be too late to decide the winner tomorrow." Duda's brows furrowed slightly, and his face showed a little regret. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion in front of him, and the golden fire was extinguished. As the fire was extinguished, Zhang Yan's figure was revealed. Surprisingly, he was not as disheveled as everyone imagined, but instead looked refreshed, as if nothing had happened. He did not look like someone who had been roasted in the fire for more than an hour. Duda's eyes narrowed, and he took a deep look at Zhang Yan. With a wave of his sleeve, he turned into a long smoke, and in the blink of an eye, he returned to the peak. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back, and also looked at the person's back. It could be said that the outcome of this match was not decided. If there was a chance, he would fight again. He thought for a while, smiled, and turned into a long ray of light, flying away. Chapter 339. Zhang Yan stepped on the smoke and was about to leave the 10 Peaks mountain to meet up with his disciples when a Taoist called out to him from afar, "Uncle Master Zhang, please stay for a moment." He turned around and realized that he recognized this person. It was Zhou Xian who voluntarily gave way to him when he was trying to break through the formation. He stopped and smiled. "What is apprentice nephew Zhou looking for me for?" Zhou Xian caught up with him and greeted respectfully, "I am here on the orders of my master to invite Uncle Master Zhang for a while." "Qi Yuntian is looking for me?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and smiled. "Since senior apprentice brother Qi has invited me, I shall go." Zhou Xian was overjoyed. He bowed again and said, "My teacher is currently waiting for you in the sand-gathering cave. Please follow me, Uncle Master." Zhou Xian saw the battle between Zhang Yan and Xiao Sha, Duda and the rest. He saw that Zhang Yan was able to fight back and forth with the two of them and ended in a draw. Zhou Xian was very impressed, and when he heard that Qi Yuntian wanted to invite Zhang Yan, he volunteered. Zhang Yan followed him and the two of them walked towards the north. Not long later, they arrived at a river bank where the tide was rushing. The moon was shining brightly and only the sound of the waves could be heard. There was a long boat on the river. It was the size of a dragon-tooth boat and it floated 10 feet above the river surface. There were pearls shining through the window and the river water was filled with the aura of treasures. Zhou Xian landed on the bow of the boat and took a few steps forward. He took the initiative to lift the curtain of the cabin and said, "Uncle Master, please." Zhang Yan leaned forward and entered the cabin. He looked around and saw that the cabin was quite spacious and could accommodate hundreds of people. At this moment, there were more than 20 people sitting at the table. Dozens of children were attending to them. Qi Yuntian sat in the middle of the main seat. On his left and right were Zhuang Bufan and Luo Qingyu. Further down, there were Ning Chongxian, Fan Chongqing and the rest, including Fang Hong and Ren Mingyao who he had met before. Other than them, there were more than 10 Taoists that he had never seen before. At this moment, they were all sizing him up with inquisitive or curious gazes. Seeing Zhang Yan enter the cabin, Qi Yuntian laughed and stood up. "Junior brother Zhang is here. Come, sit down." Everyone saw that Qi Yuntian had also stood up to welcome him. Although some people were unwilling, they had no choice but to stand up. Fan Chongqing walked up with a smile and exchanged a few polite words with Zhang Yan. Then he introduced everyone present to him. Only then did Zhang Yan realize that these Taoists were disciples of the four perfected Meng, Zhu, Yan and Zhen, especially Zhu. Most of the disciples under Reverend Yan and Reverend Yan, while under Sun Jinren, other than Ning Chongxian, there were two others. Although they were also core formation cultivators, both of them had white hair. Compared to Ning Chongshuan's vigorous and heroic appearance, he looked old and frail. In this way, among all the people present, only Zhang Yan was not a disciple of Taoist Dong Tian, which made him seem quite unusual. However, although no one came to talk to him, they did not have any objection to him sitting here. Zhang Yan also knew that if it were not for the fact that he had defeated two disciples of aristocratic families in a row in today's grand competition and his strength had been recognized by everyone, he would not be qualified to be summoned here tonight. After a few more polite words with everyone, he was arranged by Fan Chongqing to sit down. Seeing that everyone had arrived, Qi Yuntian looked down and glanced at them one by one. Everyone who came into contact with his gaze felt their hearts tremble and they unconsciously lowered their heads. He said in a deep voice, "Today, I called all of you here to tell you that from tomorrow until 7 days later, all disciples are not allowed to go out to battle without master's orders." What? Hearing this, a disciple could not help but exclaim, "Eldest senior brother, what does this mean?" Everyone's heart was full of confusion and surprise. The grand competition would last for a total of 7 days. If they did nothing, wouldn't the aristocratic families have the upper hand? What did this mean? A few people could not help but secretly look at Ning Chongxian. If this was the case, didn't it mean Qi Yuntian also looked at Ning Chongxian and said slowly, "Junior brother Ning, I believe Uncle Master's son must have told you that you don't have to compete in this grand competition anymore." Ning Chongxian sat silently for a moment, then stood up and said loudly, "Master's order cannot be disobeyed. Since Master said so, as a disciple, Chongxian will naturally obey." Everyone looked at each other. If Ning Chongxian did not win this time, it meant that they still would not be able to compete in the next grand competition. However, no one present was stupid. Although Qi Yuntian did not say it clearly, they could guess that this must be the order of the Grotto Heaven's spiritual masters. Although they were dissatisfied, the disciples had to say, "We will obey eldest senior brother's order." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. Perhaps others did not understand, but he was enlightened. The action of the master and his disciples coincided with what he had previously speculated. If this was the case, then his next step was particularly critical. There was no room for error. If he succeeded, then he would be able to reach the sky in a single bound. But he also knew that this move also needed a little luck. However, things did not always go as one wished. As long as one tried his best to fight for it, success or failure should be put aside. Otherwise, being overcautious and indecisive would lead to failure. He took a deep breath, and there was a look of determination in his eyes. After Qi Yuntian said these words, He waved his hand and dismissed all the disciples, leaving only Fan Chongqing by his side. All the disciples went out with resentment, but Ning Chongxian came over to greet Zhang Yan, then lifted the curtain and went out. Zhang Yan observed carefully, but he saw that his face was calm, and he couldn't see anything. After the crowd dispersed, Qi Yuntian glanced around and saw that only Zhang Yan had not left. He called him over and said pleasantly, "Junior brother Zhang, do you have something to say to me?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "That's right. What senior brother said earlier is that you want us to give up on this large competition and not fight for that seat. However, I have a method that will definitely allow senior brother Ning to become one of the top 10 disciples. I wonder if senior brother is interested to hear about it?" Qi Yuntian was slightly surprised, but he was not in a hurry to ask. He pondered for a while, then looked at Zhang Yan with bright eyes and said, "If junior brother Zhang really has this way, you may as well say it. Then in the next grand competition, I will definitely fight for a position for you." Zhang Yan did not care about the next grand competition. According to his previous thoughts, as long as the first step was taken, then the rest would be logical. He would not need to wait for another 24 years and he would still be able to take the position. He smiled, cupped his hands and said, "Dare I ask, senior brother, have you been in this position for more than 300 years? Qi Yuntian nodded and said, "Yes, it has been 336 years. Zhang Yan stood up and solemnly bowed to Qi Yuntian. He said loudly, "Then please abdicate in advance, and senior brother Ning will definitely be able to take the position." What? Fan Chongqing, who was next to him, was shocked. He jumped up and pointed at Zhang Yan. "Junior brother Zhang, what kind of wicked idea is this? Quickly take back what you said." Zhang Yan ignored him, just stared at Qi Yuntian and continued to say, "What does senior brother think?" Qi Yuntian was not angry, but there was a thoughtful look on his face. Fan Chongqing was also a smart person. After the excitement, he calmed down and thought about something. He frowned for a moment and pondered for a while, but he could only figure out a little. However, there were still some key points that he could not figure out. He raised his head to look at Zhang Yan, then turned to the side. Looking at Qi Yuntian, he saw that Qi Yuntian was deep in thought and did not dare to disturb him. After pondering for a while, Qi Yuntian raised his head just now and seriously said to Zhang Yan, "Junior brother Zhang, this position is extremely important to others, but to me, it's already dispensable. There's no need to linger on it. Moreover, the 10 great disciples can only sit for 360 years. In another 24 years, this elder brother will have to give up his position. But if it is only for junior apprentice brother Ning alone. But the losses outweigh the gains. If Qi Yuntian were to step down, there would naturally be an empty seat among the top 10 disciples. Under such circumstances, Ning Chongxian would naturally be able to fill the empty seat. Even the few spiritual masters from the aristocratic families would not be able to stop him. But now, Qi Yuntian was the only one who could support the overall situation. Once he gave up the position of chief, the situation would definitely be disadvantageous to them. One must know, Hu Xian, who was ranked second, was only one step away from entering the Yuaning realm. If this person reached the nascent soul stage, the strength of both sides would be greatly skewed. The reason why the aristocratic families risked falling out with the master and disciples in this competition to stop Ning Chongxian from ascending the position was probably because they wanted to delay it for another 24 years. At that time, once Qi Yuntian was gone, the situation would be greatly changed. Zhang Yan laughed loudly and said, "Senior apprentice brother, you don't have to worry about this. I have something to tell you, and there's nothing to worry about." He leaned forward and whispered something with his lips. Even with Qi Yuntian's shrewdness, after hearing these words, he suddenly raised his head and stared at Zhang Yan. After a long time, he finally looked away and said with deep meaning, "Junior apprentice brother, you're really good." Hearing the hidden praise in his voice, Zhang Yan's heart calmed down. He was now fully confident of his previous inference. Pushing Ning Chongxian to the position was only the first step, and the second step was his real purpose. At this point, Zhang Yan had said all that he could and done all that he could. Next, it was up to Qi Yuntian's decision. Qi Yuntian did not disappoint him. After a moment of contemplation, he made a decision and said, "If that's the case, it's very worth a try. What's the harm in giving up my seat?" Zhang Yan's spirit was lifted. He then said, "Senior apprentice brother, this plan should be taken by surprise. It's not easy to let the spiritual masters know, so as to avoid unexpected changes." Qi Yuntian's eyes shone brightly. He said in a deep voice, "Of course." When the two were talking, they used mysterious techniques to isolate their voices, so Fan Chongqing did not hear clearly what they were talking about. But now that he heard that the two wanted to hide from the spiritual masters and act alone, he could not help but be inexplicably surprised. He hurriedly said, "Senior apprentice brother, you must be careful." He turned around again and angrily said to Zhang Yan, "Junior apprentice brother, what nonsense are you talking about to eldest apprentice brother?" Qi Yuntian waved his hand to stop Fan Chongqing from continuing. He said to Zhang Yan in a heroic manner, "Junior apprentice brother, I already understand your intentions. This plan is very good, so we will act according to this plan. As the eldest apprentice brother of the third generation, I still have this little bit of responsibility. If the spiritual masters blame me, I will bear the responsibility alone. It has nothing to do with you." As soon as these words came out, Fan Chongqing could not help but be startled. His lips trembled a few times, but he could only shut his mouth and sigh. Zhang Yan secretly nodded. The key to his plan fell on Qi Yuntian. However, it was very difficult to make a decision. It may even be contrary to the intentions of the spiritual masters. One could imagine what kind of pressure Qi Yuntian had to bear. If this person did not dare to take the step, then he would have to find another way. But now it seemed that Qi Yuntian was indeed worthy of being the head of the third-generation disciples. Not only did he dare to take responsibility, but he also had great determination and spirit. When Zhang Yan strode out of the longboat, he looked up and saw the bright moon above the tide. The mist rippled. Today, when he took this step, he, who was originally a pawn, had become a chariot crossing the river. In the future, he would be able to move unhindered in the chess game and look down on everyone. Chapter 340. In the competition the next day, no one from the sect participated. Zhang Yan had a plan in his heart, so he didn't need to participate. As for the Xianmen aristocratic families, they were only protecting their original interests and were on the defensive, so they didn't make any moves. After 7 peaceful days, the sound of a chime could be heard in the sky. The competition had come to an end. After Qi Yuntian led the disciples to burn incense and pray, a decree floated down from the clouds and landed on the table. As the judge of the competition, Elder Sun personally went up to receive the decree. He opened it up and saw that the names of each disciple were circled. Other than the top 10 disciples, all disciples who performed well in the competition would be rewarded. At the bottom right corner of the list, there were the jade seals of the 8 Dongtian spiritual masters of the master and disciple families. They were arranged according to seniority. After he had read out the names, if nobody had any objections, then he had to write down his own name and then personally hand it over to the sect leader Reverend. After the sect leader had stamped his seal, the name would be hung high in the merit and virtue courtyard until the next big competition. After he looked at it, he read it out loud against the list. His voice spread out and everyone on the mountain could hear it clearly. All the disciples listened and realized that other than Su Wenyan losing his position and Su Yihong taking the position of the top 10 disciples, there wasn't much change from the original situation. The disciples couldn't help but be disappointed. Originally, this competition was a great opportunity for the sect to rise up again. They thought that one of them would be able to take the position of the top 10 disciples. However, they didn't get what they wanted. After Elder Sun finished reading, he secretly sighed in his heart. Then he said in a loud voice, "The names of the top 10 disciples have been announced to all the disciples. If there are no objections, this humble Taoist will pass it on to the sect leader." What he said was just a formality. The fact that the 10 of them could be placed on the law ranking was the result of the discussion of the 8 true masters of the heavenly abode. It was already a foregone conclusion. After saying it, he planned to keep the decree and leave. But it just so happened that someone shouted right at this moment. Elder Sun, wait. Elder Sun's figure paused as he looked over in astonishment. When he saw the person who spoke, he was even more stunned. He said in astonishment, "Martial nephew Qi. What are you?" The one who spoke was actually Qi Yuntian. Everyone's expressions changed. They couldn't help but look over, not understanding what he wanted to do. Qi Yuntian leaped into the air and bowed towards the clouds, saying loudly, "Esteemed teacher above." Disciple Qi Yuntian has been one of the top 10 disciples for 336 years. Today, I am willing to step down to help the younger talents of the sect. As the head disciple of the third generation, Qi Yuntian's every move was eye-catching. As soon as these words came out, the crowd went into an uproar. Ning Chongxian, who was originally sitting in the valley, had a cold and calm look on his face, but at this moment, he also raised his eyebrows. He couldn't help but stand up. A smile appeared on Zhang Yan's face, and his heart was at ease. Once Qi Yuntian said this, it could be said that the matter was settled. Not to mention that Qi Yuntian's action did not conflict with the general trend, even if the few spiritual masters considered from the perspective of taking care of his reputation, they would not reject his request. High up in the auspicious clouds, Sun Jinren could not help but be moved when he heard these words. He said, "Yun he is." Mengzhen sighed and slowly stroked his long beard. He said, "It has been hard on him. Forget it, as his teacher, I have to fulfill his wish." He waved his sleeves and pushed the clouds away, revealing his true face. He said to the people below, "Yun, since this is your wish, I will not stop you, but you have to think carefully." Qi Yuntian bowed to the sky again and said loudly, "Esteemed teacher, this disciple has made up his mind, there will be no change." Mengzhen nodded and said, "Very well, then I will do as you wish." Without hesitation, he waved his horsetail whisk and said to the depths of the clouds, "Spiritual masters, what do you think?" His voice traveled far away, and the 4 spiritual masters heard it clearly. Spiritual Master Han was a suspicious person. He could not help but frown and said coldly, "Qi Yuntian is actually willing to abdicate. What is his intention? There must be something wrong." Spiritual Master Shao smiled and said, "Using Qi Yuntian to exchange for Ning Chongxian, Meng Zhen and the others are really willing to do so." Spiritual Master Du, however, kept a straight face and said in a cold voice, "There must be a reason for this. We should be careful." Spiritual Master Shao thought about it carefully. Qi Yuntian's abdication was too good for the aristocratic families. They could not refuse it, so he turned around and said, "Senior Brother Qin, what do you think?" Spiritual Master Qin shook the white hair on his head and opened his eyes slightly. He said, "No need to stop, we can't stop, we can't stop." After saying this, he closed his eyes again, as if he did not care about anything else. The 3 spiritual masters carefully pondered the meaning of his words and nodded secretly. Senior brother is right. What was their purpose of stopping Ning Chongxian this time? Wasn't it to maintain the previous situation between master and disciple before Qi Yuntian abdicated? In their opinion, not to mention one Ning Chongxian, even if there were 2 or 3 of him, they would still be no match for one Qi Yuntian. It would be the best if he abdicated. That was exactly what they wanted. Jinren Shao coughed and replied politely to the distance, "Jinren Meng, although we are teachers, we can let our disciples do whatever they want as long as they don't break the rules of the sect. What do you think?" Mengzhen asked again, "Since my disciple abdicated, I still have to ask, who should replace one of the top 10 disciples?" Perfected Being Shao chuckled and said, "Disciple nephew Ning is talented and intelligent. He's outstanding among the disciples in the sect. I think he's not bad. He can make up for it." Taoist Meng didn't say anything more to him. He reached out and pointed at the Dermic decree. He lifted his sleeve and wiped it. In an instant he changed the name on it. After using the seal, he gently flicked it and sent it out. After the decree was read by the few spiritual masters and used the seal again, it was thrown down Mount 10 Peaks. Elder Sun took the decree, scanned it a few times, and began to read it again. This time, no one dared to stop him. After reading it 3 times, he kept the decree and did not delay any longer. He turned into a sword rainbow and flew away. After he left, the junior disciples of the master and disciples all said in private, "Zhenren Qi is so righteous." For these disciples, they did not understand the secret confrontation between the two factions, but on the surface, they could see one thing. Although this grand competition was not as exalted as they had imagined, Qi Yuntian did not hesitate to take the initiative to step down from the position of the top 10 disciples for the sake of his junior brother. They were all filled with admiration. At this moment, the disciples of the aristocratic families were overjoyed. They could not believe that Qi Yuntian stepped down so easily. This person had been firmly above their heads for more than 300 years. He was like an insurmountable mountain that pressed down on them until they could not breathe. Today, he was finally gone. They felt like the clouds were dispelled and they could see the sun again. On the fourth peak, after Feng Zhen lost the battle, he looked like he was half dead, but now he could not help but laugh. Priest Imo was confused. He looked over and asked softly, "Junior brother, why are you so happy?" Feng Zhen sneered and said, "I am laughing at Zhang Yan. He is only capable. He spent so much effort, but in the end he still gained nothing. Now, he is like me, an ordinary disciple. How can I not laugh?" Taoist Mo nodded. That Zhang Yan does not have the support of a grotto heaven. This is expected, right? Feng Zhen shook his head and said, "Senior brother, don't underestimate him. But this time, he will not be able to do anything." At this moment, outside the 10 peaks, Zhang Yan's disciples had also learned of the results of the competition. The Wang sisters did not know what Zhang Yan was thinking. Therefore, they did not think much of it. They were just relieved to see the competition come to an end. They felt that it was the best that their master was safe and sound. Lu Yini was a little confused. Before coming to the competition, Zhang Yan had told her that he wanted to fight for the position of the top 10 disciples. In her opinion, her master had always been meticulous. Especially after the battle with Duda Xiaosha and the others, she was even more convinced of this. She could not help but think, could it be that master still has something up his sleeves? But this was already decided by the 8 Grotto Heaven Masters. How could it be changed? Even the sect leader would not say anything to stop him. She really could not think of anything else that her master could do, unless, suddenly, her expression changed. She found that there was indeed a possibility. But this idea was too absurd. It just flashed in her mind for a while. Qi Mingjiao saw that she was deep in thought and thought that she was disappointed. She walked over gently and held her arm. She comforted her, "Junior sister, Uncle Master Zhang did his best this time. It was not because he was not strong enough, but because of the general trend. In the next competition, Uncle Master Zhang will definitely be able to do something." Lu Yeni grunted, but she was a little absent-minded and nodded perfunctorily. Huang Fuzhou looked at the 10 Peaks mountain. He felt a sense of loss and relief in his heart. He said to the woman beside him, "Junior sister, the dust has settled. With such an outcome, I believe Immortal Qin will have an explanation." The woman said softly, "I will write a letter to inform Master. I think she will be happy." She moved to the side of the table and sat down. She took out a letter and wrote down a line of graceful handwriting. Then, she took out a golden stamp from her sachet and sealed it. She muttered a few incantations and pointed with her slender finger. The letter left the table and flew away. It turned into a clear light and disappeared in the blink of an eye. This flying letter was like a meteor flashing by, and it flew past the vast pool of Dragon Abyss in an instant and entered the glittering jewel paradise. After flying past layer upon layer of silver walls and cloud pavilions, it arrived at a place where ice curtains and pearls hung down. Immortal Qin was sitting on a jade lotus. When she noticed the letter, she opened her eyes and used her 2 fingers to clamp the letter. She took it down and opened it. After looking at it carefully, she seemed to be deep in thought. She nodded and said, "Where is Wei Ning?" Immediately, a pretty woman in a light yellow dress walked in. Wei Ning said, "Your disciple is here. May I know why Master wants to summon me?" Immortal Qin raised his hand and picked up a green rui. He said, "Go to the floating heavenly palace and send this to the sect leader." The woman was about to go forward to receive it. At that moment, she suddenly heard a loud sound from outside. The sound was not only loud and distant, but it also had a sense of majesty and solemnity. Immortal Qin could not help but frown and thought to himself, "This is the sound of the golden bell of the floating heavenly palace. It is sect leader's senior brother summoning the disciples. Strange, the sect competition has just ended. What important matter does he have to make such a commotion?" Chapter 341. Hearing the bell in the clouds, Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. On the 10 Peaks mountain, apart from the 4 perfected masters and Qi Yuntian, he was probably the only one who knew what was going on. At that moment, golden lights flashed in the sky and dozens of talismans fell toward Qi Yuntian, Zhuang Bufan, and the other disciples. One of them flew toward Zhang Yan. He reached out and caught it. After taking a look, he realized that it was not the first time he had seen it. It was a talisman to enter and exit the floating heavenly palace. A smile appeared on his face. He looked around and saw that many of the disciples who had received the talismans had already flown away. He leaped into the air and flew towards the floating heavenly palace. Soon he arrived outside the palace. Seeing that he could not go any further due to the strong wind, he slapped the talisman and it turned into a golden light that protected him as he entered the palace. When he landed, he looked around and saw that Qi Yuntian, Zhuang Bufan, Luo Qingyu, Ning Chongxian, and the others had already arrived. He went up to greet them and sat down on a futon. After a while, Fan Changqing, Fang Hong, Ren Mingyao, and the others also landed. All the people that Zhang Yan had seen that night were here. A boy walked out from the main hall and said, "The ancestral master has ordered us to sit in the outer hall and wait for the order. If you hear what is said in the hall, you are not to make a fuss or whisper to each other. You are not to leave this place without permission. Violators will be punished according to the rules of the sect." His words were harsh and coupled with the fact that he had gathered the disciples today. All the disciples felt that something was not right. At that moment, the 8 perfected masters had already entered the main hall of the palace. Seeing that sect leader Qin was already seated in the main hall, the 4 spiritual masters of the aristocratic families were all secretly wondering why sect leader Qin was making such a big fuss this time. Especially after the sex competition, they could not help but feel nervous when they saw that the sect leader had not gotten what he wanted. However, they could not figure out what the sect leader was planning, so they braced themselves and prepared to deal with the situation carefully. After everyone sat down, perfected cultivator Qin cleared his throat. He cautiously asked, "Sect head Shixiang, may I know why you called us here in such a hurry?" The moment sect leader Qin opened his mouth, he spoke in a clear and mellow voice. "Today's discussion is about a person in our sect who has betrayed our master and killed our ancestors. We have no choice but to summon all of you here to discuss this matter." The 4 spiritual masters from the aristocratic families felt a chill in their hearts as they exchanged glances. Of course, the sect leader would not speak carelessly. Moreover, he had mobilized so many people. Clearly, this person's identity was not simple. Meng Zhen said angrily, "Master, who is this?" Perfected being Shao glanced at Meng Zhen and stroked his beard without saying a word. In his heart, however, he mocked himself. How could the 4 disciples of the sect leader not know about such a matter? They must have discussed this in private. Otherwise, how could they control the situation today? It was obvious that this exchange was done for them to see. Qin Zhenren said slowly, "In the ancestral hall. The steels that contained the seals personally sealed by the patriarch were used to deal with the 6 forbidden areas. More than 20 years ago, there was a steel that rang for no reason. It was obviously coveted by someone. They were trying to break the seal." Perfected being Qin frowned and said in a deep voice, "Senior brother, I wonder who dared to do this. Since it happened 20 years ago, why did they only bring it up today?" Just now, the 4 perfected beings from the aristocratic families vaguely remembered that the patriarch who founded the sect had set up the 6 seals. Rumor had it that there were ancient evil creatures sealed in them. It was said that if the disciples of the younger generation saw them, they must not try to break the seals. Otherwise, no matter who it was, they would be charged with the crime of betraying their master and killing their ancestors. However, they didn't know that there was a seal stele in the ancestral hall. Other than the sect leader, no one knew where the 6 seals were. Now that someone had unearthed them, it was no wonder that so many people were here. Sect leader Qin didn't answer perfected being Chen's question. Instead, he waved his horsetail whisk and said, "Call the people here." Not long after, a short and fat cultivator walked into the hall. He was a core formation cultivator. His facial features were all gathered together, making him look a little funny. He bowed respectfully to the perfected beings and said, "Disciple Miao Kun greets the sect leader and the perfected beings." Sect leader Qin said, "Miao Kun, tell the perfected beings what you know." Miao Kun bowed and said, 23 years ago, the sect leader sensed that there was something strange about the seal. It was coming from the bottom of the surging waves lake. After the 3 lakes were destroyed, the Su family was given as a residence. Therefore, I was ordered to investigate in secret. After so many years, I found that the Su family was not only trying to break the seal of the true dragon residence under the surging waves lake, but also that the entire family was planning to betray the clan. The Su family. Betray the clan. As soon as he said this, everyone was shocked. Countless thoughts flashed through the minds of the perfected beings. They almost instantly understood what the sect leader was planning. A chill ran down their spine. Among the aristocratic families, the power of the 5 clans accounted for 70 to 80%. The Su family was one of the 5 clans. It had thousands of years of history. Not to mention its deep roots, its foundation was not to be underestimated. Once it was gone, the strength of the aristocratic families would be greatly damaged. When the disciples outside heard the words in the hall, they were all shocked. But after a while, their faces were filled with joy. Although Zhang Yan, who was sitting outside the door, had already guessed it in his heart, he still felt relieved when he heard it. He thought to himself, "It's settled." He was able to guess this result not because his plan was brilliant, but because he knew that the Su family had the intention of betraying the clan. After gathering all the fragments together, he was able to think of this point. From the sect leader's point of view, now that the master and disciple had risen again, it was necessary to snatch back the resources from the aristocratic families. But they had to choose a breakthrough point. So the Su family, which did not have a heaven's abode, was obviously the best choice. If they could get rid of a big family, not only could they weaken the power of the aristocratic families, but they could also free one of the top 10 disciples, which would increase the prestige of the sect leader. It could be said to be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. At that time, although Zhang Yan thought of this possibility, he was not too sure. So he just blindly followed the trend and did not dare to jump out of the bottom line. But when the master and disciple completely retreated in the grand competition, it seemed that when there was no action, he could confirm this idea. In fact, if one were to think deeper about this matter, then no one knew where the true dragon manor was. It was very likely that the sect leader had intentionally leaked it and had long since thrown out a bait to lure the Su clan to bite it. It should be known that the heaven's abode in the Su family had long passed away, which was the biggest weakness of the clan. But if they could get either the true dragon residence or the black dragon slough, it was very likely that there would be another heaven's abode. Even if they knew that it was against the rules of the ancestral master, they had no choice but to take it. If this was really the case, the sect leader's plan was really as deep as the sea. He probably had this plan since the big change in the clan that day, and suddenly launched it at this time, striking a vital point and cutting off one of the big branches of the aristocratic families. After listening to Miao Kun, Spiritual Master Han said with some difficulty, "Sect leader Martial Uncle, just based on this person's words, is it not enough to make a conclusion?" Sect leader Qi nodded and said, "Martial nephew Han, these are prudent words." Spiritual Master Han's heart turned cold. He immediately knew that the sect leader was prepared. With a wave of his hand, sect leader Qin summoned a talisman and pointed at it. With a point of his hand, a clear water mirror appeared. With another wave of his sleeve, a scene appeared in it. Everyone looked at it and saw 5 people sitting in front of a stone door. They were facing the seal and activating a mysterious technique. Sect leader Qin said, "This technique was set up by the ancestral master back then. It was to prevent someone from secretly touching the seal. You can look carefully and recognize the people inside." The spiritual masters could clearly see that the people inside were the 5 Yuanying spiritual masters of the Su family. At this time, they had nothing to say, and at the same time, their hearts trembled. If it was only the crime of breaking the ancestral master's seal, although the 5 of them would not be enough to pay with their lives, the other 4 clans could mediate a little, and it would not be enough to implicate the younger generation. However, the sect leaders still wanted Miao Kun to come out and sentence the Su clan for the crime of betrayal. This was clearly to exterminate the entire Su clan. But why at this time? And it happened to be right after the competition? They did not believe that the sect leader just now confirmed this matter. It was obvious that he had planned this long ago and just kept it in his hands, ready to attack at any time. The 4 spiritual masters of the aristocratic families could not help but feel cold. It turned out that this was the reason why the master and disciple did not care whether Ning Chongxian was promoted or not. As long as the Su family was eradicated, there would naturally be a vacancy. This was like pulling the firewood from under the cauldron. Since the Su family was seeking death, it had nothing to do with others. Moreover, this was the crime of deceiving the ancestral master. Since it had been confirmed, there was no room for hesitation. He also made a prompt decision. His face turned serious, and he immediately said righteously, "The Su family has disregarded the kindness of the sect and intended to break the seal to be independent. They deceived the ancestral master and deceived the ancestral master. This crime cannot be punished and must be eliminated." Mengjin raised his hand and bowed to the seat of honor. He raised his voice and said, "Sect leader, please issue a decree to clean up the sect and eliminate the Su family." As soon as he spoke, the 3 spiritual masters behind him, Zhu, Yan, and Sun, said in unison, "Sect leader, please issue a decree to clean up the sect and eliminate the Su family." Seeing that the situation was irreversible, the 3 spiritual masters, Shao, Du, and Han, had no choice but to agree. "Sect leader, please issue a decree to clean up the sect and eliminate the Su family." Sect leader Qin nodded and said calmly, "The Su family must be eliminated. However, there are no more grotto heavens in the family. There are only 5 Yuanying cultivators. There is no need for you to show up. You can leave it to the younger generation. You can just wait here for news." The 4 spiritual masters of the aristocratic families were helpless. They knew that the sect leader was preventing any of them from leaking the news, so as to prevent a single person from the Su clan from leaving. It was just that at this time, no one was willing to break the law and threaten to leave. Sect leader Qin said to the servant boy beside him, "Go and call Yuntian here." The servant boy obeyed the order and left. Not long after, Qi Yuntian arrived at the main hall. He bowed and said, "Disciple Qi Yuntian greets the sect leader, master, and spiritual masters." Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "Yun, you may dispense with the formalities. You were in the outer hall and must have heard about this. You will be in charge of the extermination of the Su family. I will bestow upon you a golden talisman and jade badge. All the disciples and elders will be under your command." He raised his hand and a golden light flew down. Qi Yuntian reached out and caught it. He said loudly, "Disciple obeys." Sect leader Qin waved his sleeves and smiled, "Go." Qi Yuntian bowed to the main hall and turned to leave. Sun Jinren's expression changed. He said, "Master, since the Su family needs to be eliminated, the position of the top 10 disciples is empty. Who does Master have in mind?" At this moment, a voice was heard from outside the main hall. "Sect leader Shixiang, Huang Fuzhou is a talent in the sect. He can take this position." As the voice faded, spiritual master Qin's clothes fluttered as he stepped into the main hall. Chapter 342. After Immortal Qin entered the hall, the expressions of the 4 immortals changed slightly. Sun Jinren frowned and then sneered. Immortal Zhu and Immortal Yan exchanged a look, and the situation suddenly became a little subtle. Immortal Qin came to the front of the hall as if there was no one else, found a seat on the right side of sect leader Qin, and sat down. Then she said, "Senior brother, I heard that the immortals were discussing who should replace the position of the top 10 disciples. I think that Huang Fuzhou has been cultivating in the sect for more than 100 years. He is not inferior to the top 10 disciples in terms of martial arts, cultivation, and seniority. Besides, he has made a lot of contributions to the sect, so he should take this position." In the end, she slowed down and raised her head to glance at the faces of the immortals from the aristocratic families. There seemed to be a deep meaning in her eyes. Immortal Xiao and Immortal Du did not say anything. Only Immortal Han seemed to be moved, and his body slightly leaned forward. Perfected cultivator Qin sat there motionlessly with his eyes closed. It was as if he had heard nothing. Only Sun Jinren sneered and said, "Immortal Qin, you are wrong. In the competition, Huang Fuzhou has already been defeated by Zhang Yan. If he takes the position of the top 10 disciples, how can others be convinced?" Immortal Qin glanced at him and said lightly, "Martial nephew's son, Zhang Yan won that day with his Dharma treasure. If Huang Fuzhou also has a good Dharma treasure, the result will be hard to predict." Jinren's son was so angry that he laughed. Just as he was about to retort, he heard someone say from outside, "Jinren Qin, I beg to differ. Huang Fuzhou was defeated by Luo Yuanhua in the last grand competition, and in this grand competition, Zhang Yanxian was defeated by Huang Fuzhou. Then he defeated Luo Yuanhua, defeated Feng Zhen 3 times, and fought to a draw with Xiao Sha and Duda. With such a record, except for the top 10 disciples, who else in the sect can compare? It's clear who's stronger and who's weaker." The voice came from outside the hall. As it got closer, a phoenix hairpin could be seen. The female cultivator with a long skirt that dragged the ground strolled into the hall. When the voice stopped, she happened to walk to the center of the hall. She bowed to the sect leader and said, "Disciple Peng Wuning greets the sect leader." Sect leader Qin waved his sleeve and smiled warmly. "Martial nephew Peng, please don't be so polite. Let's sit down and talk." Immortal Peng's phoenix eyes swept across the room. Then he walked gracefully towards the table where the master and his disciple were seated. Although the expressions of the 4 Zenrins remained the same, they had a bad feeling in their hearts. Looking at the current situation, Jinren Peng had openly stood on the side of the master and disciple. Meanwhile, outside the main hall, when Zhang Yan heard that Immortal Peng had entered the hall to speak for him, he could not help but smile. He was even more certain in his heart. This was his real plan. As long as he was promoted to the position of master and disciple, he would be able to lure out Immortal Peng behind him, inviting her into this game of chess. If one piece is alive, the whole plate will be alive. Previously, in the process of complying with the general trend, he started from the details and found a way to break the situation. He also tried his best to persuade Qi Yuntian to abdicate. On the surface, it seemed that the master and disciple were at a disadvantage. However, with the support of a Taoist abode, their strength had increased greatly. The step he took seemed simple, but in fact, it required foresight, luck, and decisiveness. The opportunity was fleeting. If he did not act decisively, he would lose the opportunity if he hesitated. With the support of Immortal Peng, the master and disciple no longer had to worry about Immortal Qin's wavering art of balance. Zhang Yan was sure that Immortal Qin would not let him take the position so easily. He would definitely do everything possible to keep Immortal Peng out of the game. However, he had already won half of the game. Crafty tricks could be used for a while, but not forever. In the end, he still had to rely on his own strength. At this moment, in the main hall of the floating heavenly palace, the 10 Taoist abodes of Qinsong School had gathered. As soon as Immortal Peng appeared, he publicly expressed his support for Zhang Yan. Then he sat on the seat of the master and disciple, making his attitude clear. Immortal Qin could not help but sigh. She also knew that Huang Fuzhou was lacking, but at this time, she did not have anyone she liked, so she had to push him out. If Immortal Peng did not appear, she would have a great chance of pushing Huang Fuzhou to temporarily take the position. She turned her beautiful eyes and did not argue with Immortal Peng. Instead, she said to Sect Master Qin, "Senior brother, we can't argue about who is better with words. There is no need to argue about who is better between Huang Fuzhou and Zhang Yan. I didn't think it through just now. There are countless talents in the sect. Who is the only one who is outstanding just now? In my opinion, this time, whoever can take down Su Yihong will be able to take the position. What do you all think? Her last sentence was directed at the other perfected cultivators. At this moment, perfected cultivator Chen suddenly opened his eyes and said, "This is appropriate." Perfected cultivator Xiao praised in his heart. Qin Yu's method was really ingenious. She could not take the fruit herself, so she threw the fruit out for everyone to share. When the time came, it would be a chaotic battle. It might not be entirely dependent on one's own strength, so it would be hard to say who would take down Su Yihong. If he thought further, he was afraid that everyone would have a chance. In this way, even if Zhu and Yen did not agree, at least they would not oppose it. Because they had many disciples in the sect, it was not impossible for them to give it a try. Moreover, this gave them a way out. They could take the initiative to intervene and not just watch from the outside. The aristocratic families could also participate in the elimination of the Su clan, which was probably what the sect master wanted to see. After thinking for a while, perfected cultivator Xiao gave perfected Han a look. The latter immediately understood and said, "Sect Master Perfected Han, we are also willing to command our capable disciples to be deployed by Marshal Nephew Qi to eliminate the Su clan." As expected, perfected cultivator Zhu and Yen obviously knew their intentions. They sat there stroking their beards without saying a word. Sun Jinren could not help but want to say something, but Mengzhen looked over and shook his head at him. He could only restrain himself. Perfected cultivator Peng's expression was tranquil and he did not say anything. Compared to the other 9 heavenly abodes, she was the latest to enter Dao. Her cultivation was also 1 level lower, so her words did not carry much weight. This was all she could do at the moment. The rest would all depend on Zhang Yan's own strength. Seeing that no one objected, Sect Master Qin said slowly, then as junior sister said, "The one who defeats Su Yihong can replace the vacant position of the 10th disciple." Her voice was not loud, but it spread far and wide. The disciples outside the hall all heard it clearly. For a moment, everyone's hearts were burning with excitement. They could not fight for this position in the grand competition, but there was no harm in trying now. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. Who would he be afraid of when it came to facing an enemy in battle? If he could not even pass this, how could he talk about sitting on the position of the 10th disciple? When he defeated Su Yihong, even the perfected cultivators of the heavenly abodes would have nothing to say. The 4 perfected cultivators of the aristocratic families were approved by the sect master. He waved his hand and sent out dozens of talismans to summon the disciples. At this moment, they were all sitting in the hall. Their every move was under the eyes of Sect Master Qin. Naturally, no one dared to secretly do anything to inform the Su family. Perfected cultivator Qin also shook his sleeves and sent out a talisman. At this point, she could no longer act as freely as before. She knew that the sect master had long disliked her actions. It was just that due to the situation, it was not convenient for him to act out. He supported perfected cultivator Peng with all his strength, which was actually to contain and resist her. She originally thought that perfected cultivator Ping just now had become a grotto heaven and had no capable disciples. He would at least be silent for at least a few decades before he would make a move. She was also secretly planning countermeasures. But she did not expect that Zhang Yan would go with him and catch her off guard. Now that she was in a hurry, she could only try to fill in the gaps. In just 2 hours, the disciples of the aristocratic families arrived one after another. Zhang Yan looked around. Including the disciples and elders that Qi Yuntian just now had gathered, there were more than 10 Yuanying perfected cultivators, nearly 100 core formation cultivators, and thousands of mystic light realm disciples in the outer hall. This force was enough to annihilate a sect like the North Star sect, but it was still insufficient to annihilate the Su clan. Therefore, there was still a steady stream of disciples coming. Zhang Yan could not help but think that the Zhou family was far south of the Donghua continent. Their foundation was deep, and they were much stronger than the Su family. Moreover, There were perfected cultivators of the heavenly abodes in the clan. If he wanted to destroy the Zhou family in the future, he would probably need several perfected cultivators of the heavenly abodes to join forces. Qi Yuntian stood in the hall. He calmly assigned the disciples. There were a total of 5 Yuanying perfected cultivators in the Surging Waves Lake. This area of water covered a large area and was protected by a spell formation. It was easy to defend and hard to attack. Therefore, they needed to set up formation flags around it to surround them and not let a single one of them escape. In addition, the Su family also had many spiritual islands, mountains, and caves. They had to take them all and take them back to the sect. In the future, they would be given to the disciples. When they arrived at the floating heavenly palace, the disciples just now knew that the Su family intended to betray the sect and become independent. They had committed the crime of deceiving their masters and ancestors. This time, they were summoned to eliminate them. While they were shocked, they couldn't help but have some ideas. The Su clan was a great clan that had existed for thousands of years. The disciples of the clan must have many good things on them. If they could get 1 or 2, it would be much better than painstakingly killing demons and accumulating good karma. Qi Yuntian called Ning Chongxian over and said with a smile, "Junior apprentice brother, Su Wenyan did not win against you that day. He is still in the sect and is a guest at Fang Zhenlu's place. I will leave him to you. You can leave first." Ning Chongxian nodded solemnly and raised his hand to salute. "Eldest apprentice brother, I will not let you down." After watching Ning Chongxian leave, Qi Yuntian called Fan Chongqing over and said in a deep voice, "Junior apprentice brother, there is one thing that you must do. Go to Wei Country's Jin State." He whispered a few words to Fan Chongqing. Fan Chongqing's expression turned serious. He then bowed and said, "Don't worry, eldest apprentice brother. I will do my best." Qi Yuntian said, "Good. Although there are no powerful cultivators there, you need to be careful. Don't be careless." Fan Chongqing bowed to Qi Yuntian again and straightened his robe. He slapped the talisman and turned into a golden light, flying out of the floating heavenly palace. He was going to ancient Qinyang County, which was now Wei Country's Jin State, where the roots of the Su clan were. There were hundreds of thousands of Su clan members there, but most of them were mortals. He did not need to care about them. His mission was to find all the Su clan cultivators who were stationed there and kill them. He wanted to cut off the Su clan's disciples' path of reincarnation so that they would not be revived. This matter could only be done by careful people. Qi Yuntian did not feel at ease with others, so he ordered Fan Chongqing to take care of it. After Qi Yuntian had made the necessary arrangements, he invited Zhang Yan to him just now. After the two had a private conversation, Qi Yuntian patted Zhang Yan's shoulder and said meaningfully, "Junior apprentice brother Zhang, I will be in charge of the extermination of the Su clan. No one can take what is yours. You don't need to follow us. You can go alone." Zhang Yan understood tacitly and said with a smile, "Senior brother, I'll take my leave first." Qi Yuntian smiled and clasped his hands behind his back. "Go." Zhang Yan cupped his fists and bade farewell to him. He activated the talisman in his hand and a golden light enveloped his body, sending him out of the floating sky palace. Then, with a burst of smoke, he flew tens of miles away in no time. But at this moment, he stopped and his eyes flickered. He seemed to have thought of something. Then he stepped on the smoke again, but he did not go to the Surging Waves Lake. Instead, he went to the Guardian Palace. Chapter 343. Zhang Yan's sword escape technique was extremely fast, so it didn't take long for him to reach the vast sea. In less than half an hour, he arrived at the Guardian Palace. From afar, a Taoist nun dressed in red came to welcome them. Zhang Yan had been here before, and she had seen him once, so she naturally wouldn't forget him. She came up and cupped her hands, saying very politely, "So it's senior brother Zhang of Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake. Is senior brother here to pay a visit to Taoist master?" Unfortunately, Taoist master left the palace early in the morning. "Since you're here, why don't you take a seat in the palace?" Zhang Yan returned the greeting and smiled. "Junior sister, I'm not here to visit Taoist master, but to see junior sister Qinin." The Taoist nun said, "So senior brother wants to see senior sister Chinan. Please come in and have a seat. I will send someone to call senior sister Chinan over." The Taoist nun knew that Taoist master Peng treated Zhang Yan like an honored guest, so she tried to curry favor with him. After inviting him into the palace, she served him fragrant tea and sent 2 maids to serve him. Zhang Yan didn't come without a reason. He came to fetch Su Ong, who was cultivating in the minor demon cave. Since he was going to destroy the Su clan, who else would know more about it than the Su clan's disciples? Moreover, if he had the chance, he would want to see the true Dragon Hall. With Su Ang's help, it would be much more convenient. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he saw Chinan walking in. She wore a lotus-colored dress with a light yellow sash around her waist, and her watery sleeves fluttered in the wind, causing her to seem elegant and beautiful like a lotus flower. A trace of happiness appeared in her beautiful eyes when she saw Zhang Yan, and she said, "It really is senior brother. The sect has dispersed, and the seats haven't been decided yet. How could you have the time to come here?" Zhang Yan stood up and said with a smile, "To be dissatisfied, junior sister, I still have important matters to attend to, so it's inconvenient for me to stay here any longer. I would like to ask Master to make things convenient for me and allow me to go to the Ci Demon Cave." According to the time, today wasn't the first day of the lunar month, so it wasn't the time to enter the cave. Seeing that Zhang Yan seemed to really have an urgent matter, she didn't ask what it was and immediately said, "This is a small matter. Martial brother, please follow me." After the 2 of them left the hall, they used their movement techniques to fly higher up. Originally, flying was prohibited on the Guardian Island, but with Chinan leading the way, they didn't have to worry so much. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of the flying crane tower where the demon eye was. After immortal Peng achieved the cave abode, the place had been renovated. When the sea breeze blew, the music was faintly discernible, and auspicious clouds shrouded the place, giving it a somewhat immortal atmosphere. Chinan moved forward and gave a few instructions to the disciples on duty before sending them away. After that, she flicked her wrist and withdrew a talisman. With a gentle shake, a ray of light flashed past. The mist in front of the door slowly dissipated. She turned around and said to Zhang Yan, "Senior martial brother, I have already removed the restriction. You can go in without worry. If there is nothing else, I will take my leave first." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, junior sister, for today's matter." Chinan's lips curled into a smile. She said, "Xixiang, you don't have to be so courteous with little sister." She curtsied and left. Zhang Yan stepped into the flying crane tower and saw a white jade railing in the middle of the tower. It was still the same as it was 20 years ago. The last time he came here, he was still a light aura disciple who wanted to break through to the mystic light realm and go through the demonic cave with Xiezong Yuan and the others. Now, he was at the core formation realm and was fighting for the position of one of the top 10 disciples. Although this place was different, his heart of seeking immortality was still firm. He took a few steps forward and stood on the railing of the well. He formed a hand seal and summoned Su Yang's soul. Not long after, he received a response in his heart. He took out a piece of jade and threw it into the water. Suddenly, a black light shot out from the eye of the sea and entered the jade. Zhang Yan's movements were fast. He raised his hand and recalled the jade. He put it in his sleeve and flew out of the hall. He flew quickly in the sky and passed by Jiangben Island. Just now, he sat down and took out the jade. He said in a deep voice, "Where is Su Yang?" A clear silhouette appeared from the jade and kowtowed, "This lowly one greets Master. May Master be safe and sound." Su Yang had cultivated at the bottom of the sea for 30 years, and he had the origin-seeking scripture. He was many times stronger than those demons who had no consciousness and could only rely on time. Now that he had the body of a true demon, he was like a mortal mystic light realm cultivator. He was gloomy like a ghost, and there was a layer of demonic energy around his face. However, he was still trembling in front of someone like Zhang Yan who could decide his life and death with one thought. Zhang Yan said loudly, "Su Yang, I don't mind telling you that the betrayal of your family has been exposed. The sect wants to exterminate them." Su Yang's body shook and he said, "Master, after this little one lost his physical body, I am no longer a member of the Su family." Zhang Yan smiled. "Don't panic. I'm going to steal a physical body for you and become a disciple of the Su family again." Su Yang's mind worked quickly and he guessed what Zhang Yan meant. He followed along and said, "This little one will follow master's orders." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and put the jade into his sleeves. He rose into the air and turned into a streak of clouds as he headed toward the surging waves lake. At the same time, the cave that Su Yang was in was surrounded by 1,000 or so cultivators. Rainbow lights shone in all directions, and there was a dense mist everywhere. Under Qi Yuntian's orderly arrangements, in just 15 minutes, countless formation flags and restrictions had been set up around this area. Because they knew that the 5 nascent soul venerable masters of the Su clan were all here, in order to prevent them from escaping, there were 3 nascent soul venerable masters standing guard at each position, coordinating with each other and relying on each other to help each other. After the formation flags were set up, Qi Yuntian personally sat on the main seat and waved the formation flags in his hand. A loud sound came from the 4 corners of the formation, and a yellow smoke rushed up and condensed into a ball in the air, covering the sky. But he didn't stop there. He ordered his disciples to continue setting up restrictions outside the formation. If this continued, it would only take a day and a night to set up this place like an iron bucket. The people inside would be like turtles in a jar. Even a Yuanying spiritual master wouldn't be able to break out. If the 5 Yuanying spiritual masters were to risk their lives and charge into the formation, maybe 1 or 2 of them would have a chance to break out of the cage and escape. But they had been refining the restrictions at the bottom of the lake for more than 20 years. The disciples didn't dare to disturb them. By the time they realized something was wrong, they had already missed the opportunity. At this moment, in the underground palace of the deep stream, Su Yihong was flying down the long tunnel like a meteor. This passageway extended diagonally for over 30 kilometers underground, and it led directly to the true dragon's abode. Before long, he arrived at the end of the passageway, and he strode into the inner hall with large strides. He said loudly to the disciples on duty that were looking at him in astonishment, "I wish to see the 5 granduncles." The disciple on duty didn't buy it and said coldly, "Deng, the 5 ancestors are in seclusion. No matter what, don't disturb them." Su Yihong's eyes turned fierce. He reached out and pushed the disciple to the side. Then he shouted loudly and knocked the heavy stone door open. When he stepped into the inner hall, the iron armor on his body was still shaking. He wanted to go forward, but when he looked up, he saw a golden talisman blocking his way. He knew he couldn't go through. With a loud bang, he knelt in front of the door and said loudly, "5 granduncles, there's a change in the sect." Now Qi Yuntian has led more than 1,000 cultivators to surround the deep stream. I'm afraid the matter of the true dragon cave has been exposed. How should I deal with it? Please tell me, granduncles. He waited patiently for a while. An old voice came from inside and said, "We already know what's happening outside. You don't have to worry. Go and stop them for a while. You only need to hold on for a day or 2, and there will be a turn for the better." As soon as the voice finished speaking, several beams of treasure light landed in front of him. The voice continued, "These are our magic treasures. Now they are all bestowed to you. There is also a Dharma seal. You can command all the mortal disciples in the outside world, regardless of whether they live or die." Su Yihong looked up and said confidently, "If it's just a day or 2, there's no need for others to help. I alone am enough." At this time, outside of the deep stream, Qi Yuntian was sitting on the flag platform. A white-haired Daoran came up and said, "Eldest senior brother, I've just circled around a few times and understood it. This forbidden array is called the Returning Dragon Mirage Array. It's an external defensive array. Inside, there are countless small array cages. There are also array tools that connect the mountains, rivers, and the Earth's Qi. There are also disciples who maintain control of the array. As long as the spiritual Qi is not exhausted and the array is operating properly, once a door is broken, another door can be created. There will never be a day when it's broken." At this point, Daoran turned around and pointed at the forbidden array in the distance. He said, "If you want to break this array, if there's no inside to occupy the flag position, you need a powerful cultivator to stabilize the qi. Then, you need to order the disciples to attack day and night from the outside to reduce its spiritual qi and control its rotation. Finally, you need to order the disciples to kill their way in from the living door and break the flag door to break the array." Qi Yuntian listened and nodded. Although this array was difficult to break, there was a path to follow and a method to rely on. It was just a little more effort. The most troublesome ones were those strange restrictions that he didn't know of. Just calculating the operation of the formation would take a long time. At this moment, in addition to the 12 nascent soul Taoist masters guarding the outer formation, there were also 4 nascent soul elders from the aristocratic families on the side. After giving a few instructions, he sent them to the 4 corners with their magic treasures to stabilize the formation. However, less than an hour later, the mist above the deep ravine froze, as if it had been grabbed by a large hand. The white-haired Daoran showed a happy expression and said, "Eldest senior brother, the senior brothers have stopped the array. Now we can start." Qi Yuntian's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand and shot out a talisman. In an instant, there was a whistling sound in the sky. With the sound of this talisman, countless rays of golden light flew out like a torrential rain. The whistling sound was like the tide as it fell on the grand array outside the deep stream. This time, the attack gathered the power of more than 1,000 cultivators. It was divided into 2 waves and they took turns to attack. At this moment, the array above the deep stream was like a candle in the wind, flickering. However, after 2 hours, there was a rumbling sound and the northwest gate opened, revealing a door. Qi Yuntian knew that there would be a trap inside the life gate. He looked left and right and said, "The life gate has been opened. If any of the disciples can break the gate, I will report to the sect master and he will be rewarded." As soon as these words came out, the hearts of the core formation disciples from the aristocratic families moved, but they were afraid of stepping into the trap. However, after watching for a while and seeing that there was no movement from the door, they couldn't hold back anymore since they had treasures protecting them. 3 of them stepped forward and clasped their hands toward Qi Yuntian. Without waiting for a response, they led more than 10 mystic light realm cultivators toward the door of life. Chapter 344. These 3 core formation cultivators were all disciples of the 12 great houses. They had cultivated for less than 100 years and relied on the power of their clans to barely achieve the lower 3 grades of core formation. However, they knew in their hearts that they had no hope of achieving Tao and would have to reincarnate sooner or later. However, in the big clans, reincarnation was also particular. If they found a poor family to reincarnate, and if they were born with good aptitude, then it was fine. The elders of the clan would take them to cultivate. However, if they didn't have spirituality, then they would have to live a poor life in the mortal world. Not only would they have to work hard for others, but no one would care about their life and death. Just like that, they were extremely unwilling. They always wanted to live a life of luxury. Even if they couldn't cultivate in their next life, they would be able to live a carefree and rich life. However, if they wanted to live in a rich family, they would have to make great contributions to the clan. It would take who knows how many years to kill demons, and they might not be able to defeat their own clans. If they could break through the gate, it would be a great opportunity. Thus, they were the first to bravely take the lead. Just now, they entered the formation gate. However, they saw a figure stepping on the void, tearing through the air and rushing over. The light and shadows in the formation were chaotic, and it was hard to see. They didn't know who it was, so they were secretly on guard. When the person came in front of them, the 3 could see clearly. This person was more than 3 meters tall, more than twice the size of a normal person. He wore a crown and armor, and held a long rod in his hand. He was dressed differently from a normal cultivator. They had all seen this person in the competition before, so they immediately exclaimed, "Su Yihong." The 3 instantly panicked. They originally just wanted to take advantage of the situation and didn't have much fighting spirit. Now that they saw this disciple of the Su clan coming over with a murderous aura, They were afraid and didn't dare to fight. They turned their heads and wanted to retreat. Su Yihong just realized that the formation couldn't operate as it wished. He immediately guessed the opponent's goal and rushed towards the Qian position's life gate. Now that he saw that the person trying to enter the formation saw him and ran away without fighting, his gaze turned fierce. He said, "Where do you think you're going?" He roared like a tiger, shaking all four directions. It was unknown what technique he used, but he actually appeared behind them in a single step. He swung the black dragon cloud-scraping staff in his hand and swept it horizontally. Just now, when the staff fell, it made a whistling sound. A disciple who had left a little later could not avoid it in time and hurriedly turned around. He took out a bowl-shaped magic treasure. The mouth of the bowl was facing outwards, and it emitted a bright blue light to protect his front. Who would have thought that the cloud-scraping rod would treat this magic treasure as nothing? With a "pa" sound, it shattered the magic treasure into pieces. Its power didn't stop there as it struck the disciple's chest. The powerful force immediately split the disciple into two pieces. The two disciples at the front were shocked and took advantage of Su Yihong's slight delay. He leaped out of the flag gate and fled towards the outer formation. Just now, the people outside the array saw that the three of them had just entered. Only two people ran out, and their expressions were filled with panic. Just as they were puzzled, they saw a figure rush out from the gate. The figure was extremely fast, and with just a few steps, he arrived behind one of them and snatched the stick out of his hand. This strike was as fast as lightning, instantly piercing through the right side of the disciple's chest. With another twist, he exploded into flesh and blood. At this moment, the last disciple had already run hundreds of feet away, thinking that he was out of danger. Su Yihong's gaze focused, and his throat bulged as he roared at the person behind him. With a rumbling sound, it was as if there was a huge drum being beaten in the air. The disciple instantly felt like he was struck by lightning, stumbling a few steps. Su Yihong let out a sharp roar and charged over. He leaped up and with a "kacha" sound, he smashed the head of the disciple. The violent force didn't stop there, and the corpse was smashed into a ball of mush. Before the soul could escape, it dissipated. After killing the three of them, he held his staff horizontally in front of the array gate, coldly facing the thousands of Qinsong school disciples. Qi Yuntian couldn't help but praise, "I heard that Su Yihong was born with spiritual roots, and since he was in his mother's womb, he was watered with jade liquid and nourished with golden medicine." Su Wenian said that he wasn't as good as this person, and that he would most likely lose. Today, it seems like it wasn't a lie. The white-haired Taoist beside him also nodded and said, "This person is hard to take down, we need capable disciples to surround and attack him." At this moment, a young cultivator dressed in luxurious clothing walked out from below the stage. His face was pink, and a sword hung on his waist, looking extraordinary. He came up and cupped his hands, saying angrily, "Eldest senior brother, this person killed my junior brother, please allow me to take revenge." Qi Yuntian looked down and nodded, "So it's junior brother Wu. Su Yihong's cultivation is extraordinary, but junior brother's journey is too dangerous. Why don't you choose someone else to go with junior brother?" Seeing Qi Yuntian's words, junior martial brother Wu couldn't help but feel happy. He was about to bring a few of his close friends with him, but just as he was about to agree, another 4 or 5 people stood up and said, "Senior martial brother is right, we are willing to help junior martial brother Wu." Junior brother Wu's expression immediately turned ugly. These people were from different families, they were obviously here to steal the credit from him. However, he could tell that these people were related to the 3 dead cultivators by marriage. They were all very bold and confident, so he had no way to kick them away. He cursed in his heart, but there was nothing he could do. Qi Yuntian smiled, looked around and said, "Good, whoever takes down that Su Yihong, I will ask the sect master and the other enlightened beings for his merit and recommend him to take the position of one of the top 10 disciples." These people were overjoyed when they heard this. This wasn't a competition between the sects, so there was no need to follow any rules. As for who would be able to kill Su Yihong, it would depend on the luck of each family. Although junior martial brother Wu was unwilling, he had no choice but to follow these people. 6 clouds of smoke soared in the sky, aggressively charging towards Su Yihong. After they flew into the air, more than 100 streaks of light followed. They were the disciples of the mystic light realm of the various races. Although they couldn't fight against Su Yihong, they could help him with their treasures to increase their numbers. There were also some disciples of the master and disciple branch who wanted to go up and attack together, but Qi Yuntian didn't give a decree, so they didn't dare to move. After this group of people went far away, the white-haired Daorin asked in a low voice, "First senior brother, why did you let them go?" Qi Yuntian smiled and said, "Although Su Yihong rarely shows himself in the sect, he was favored by the 4 enlightened beings and was promoted to be one of the top 10 disciples. How can he be taken down so easily? I'll let them suffer a bit so that they won't say that I'm unfair and biased towards the disciples of the master and disciple branch." The white-haired Daorin nodded and didn't say anything else. The 6 disciples quickly arrived in front of the array. They knew that Su Yihong was a cultivator of the strength path, so they didn't dare to get too close. When they were 30 feet away, they stopped moving forward and shouted in unison. They threw the treasures in their hands into the air. The 100 or so disciples behind them didn't want to be left out and also released the treasures in their hands. All kinds of treasures flashed and gathered toward Su Yihong. Su Yihong let out a wild laugh as he faced over 100 magical treasures. His body trembled and his joints shook. On top of the golden crown, there was a scarlet jewel that shone brightly. In a split second, it emitted a white mist that looked like a cloud. It was hundreds of feet wide and looked like an umbrella covering the top of his head. It was unknown what it was, but it was as if many magical treasures were attacking him. However, they were all caught by the white mist. It only buzzed there, unable to move. Qi Yintian's expression changed slightly. Most of the people here didn't recognize this treasure, but he did. It was called the Escape Pearl, one of the 7 pearls on enlightened being Su Mo's robe. 100 years ago, there was a huge change in the sect. This enlightened being Dong Tian died in the hands of that fierce person, and this enlightened being's treasure was also broken because the 7 pearls had already gained spirituality. After that, they went their separate ways and no one knew where they went. He didn't think that he would see it again today. It must have been found by Lady Su, but she couldn't find all of them. Otherwise, there wouldn't be only one embedded in Su Yihong's crown. This treasure couldn't hurt or stop the enemy, but it could release a mist cloud that protected the body. If it wasn't a Xian artifact, it would be impossible to get close. The 6 of them saw that their magic treasures seemed to be stuck to the cloud, unable to descend and unable to retract them. They hurriedly used their Dharma techniques, but no matter how they tried, there was no movement. All of their faces turned red, unable to advance or retreat. Su Yihong laughed wildly. The golden armor on his body rang and he walked in front of one of them with one step. The cloud contact rod created a light shadow and smashed the head of the person, causing it to fall to the ground. With a turn of his body, he appeared in front of another person in the blink of an eye. His rod swept towards the waist. That person turned pale with fright when he saw his peer's fate. He hastily tried to dodge, but it was already too late. He heard the sound of the wind, and with a "hee" sound, he was struck in the waist. In the blink of an eye, he was beaten into a ball of rotten meat. The remaining 4 people were frightened out of their wits. How could they still care about retrieving their magic treasures? They quickly withdrew from the scene. The white-haired Daorin exclaimed, "Earth-shrinking technique? Cultivators of the Qi path don't even bother to learn this spell. I didn't think that this person could use it so well. Combined with his strength path Xian art, it will be hard to break." Qi Yuntian thought for a while and said, "I think this person has more than one spell. Junior brother, watch carefully." At this moment, Su Yihong suddenly shouted. His voice was like rumbling thunder. Among the 1,000 disciples present, those with slightly weaker cultivations felt their ears rumble, and their minds became dizzy. The people in front of the flag gate were even worse. More than 100 Xian Light Realm disciples seemed to have been hit by a hammer. They all fell down like rain. The remaining 4 core Transformation Realm cultivators seemed to be drunk and their footsteps became erratic. Su Yihong let out a roar and chased after them. He swung his staff at each of them as if he was killing dogs. In the blink of an eye, 3 of their heads had been exploded by him. However, junior brother Wu's cultivation base was extraordinary, and he was a bit further away. When he saw what was happening, he was scared out of his wits. He didn't dare to stay for even a moment longer, and was just about to fly away when Su Yihong suddenly sucked in a breath. A whistling sound could be heard, and a gust of wind sprang up, shaking him so violently that he looked like he was about to fall off the clouds. Su Yihong let out a "p" sound and swung his staff. With a "pa" sound, Wu Shidi's head exploded and he died on the spot. Su Yihong sneered and hit the clouds with his rod. He shouted, "Is there no one left in my family? Why are you sending these trash to die?" The disciples outside the array saw Su Yihong kill 6 core transformation cultivators in an instant. Adding the 3 from before, he had already killed 9 people. They didn't expect this person to be so fierce and domineering. Huang Fuzhou, who was standing outside the formation, was also shocked. He had come here with a plan. After all, he was interested in the position of the top 10 disciples. Now that there was an opportunity, he must seize it. However, he wasn't a reckless person. He didn't have much confidence in Su Yihong's strength. He wanted to wait for others to test Su Yihong's strength before going forward. However, there was someone who might not let him have his way. The white-haired old Taoist bowed to Qi Yuntian and said, "Eldest senior brother, Immortal Qin once said that Huang Fuzhou's junior brother Huang's cultivation is profound and his cultivation is not ordinary. He is qualified to be one of the top 10 disciples. That Su Yihong's ability is not small. Since junior brother Huang is so good, why not order him to capture this person?" Chapter 345. The white-haired old Taoist's words were extremely resounding, and everyone heard them. Huang Fuzhou was startled, but after thinking about it for a moment, he knew that this was not the time for him to shrink back. He took a deep breath and had no choice but to take the initiative to step forward. He bowed and said, "Eldest senior brother, junior brother is willing to go and fight Su Yihong." Qi Yuntian said slowly, "Does junior brother Huang need help? Just say it." The white-haired Taoist shook his head. "Eldest senior brother, junior brother Huang wants to be one of the top 10 disciples. He is very ambitious. If others help, wouldn't it be belittling him?" Qi Yuntian laughed and said, "It's my fault." Huang Fuzhou's heart skipped a beat. He originally wanted to find a few people from the same sect to help him, but how could he do that now? He subconsciously looked at Qi Yuntian, seeing the calmness in his eyes, as if he was also looking at him. He quickly lowered his head and said bitterly, "Eldest senior brother, I will be enough." Qi Yuntian revealed a smile and said gently, "Junior brother Huang's courage is commendable. Su Yihong is a strength path cultivator. His godly strength is shocking. The cloud-scraping rod in his hand can break many enchantments. You must be careful. If the situation is not good, then quickly come back. Don't get injured, it will not be good." The more Huang Fuzhou heard, the colder his heart became. His original plan was to exchange a few blows with Su Yihong. If he had the chance, he would definitely capture him. But if he really wasn't a match for him, then he would just suffer some minor injuries and find an excuse to retreat. But Qi Yuntian's words clearly forced him into a corner. If he really did that, then how would Immortal Qin see him? Would he think that he still admired the master and disciple lineage? That he actually did not want to help her sincerely? It seemed like he could only fight with his life on the line. He gritted his teeth. That Su family deceived the master and killed the ancestors. How would junior brother dare to cherish his life? Eldest senior brother and fellow disciples, please wait for the good news. The white-haired Taoist looked at Huang Fuzhou, then at Qi Yuntian, shook his head and sighed. He was very clear of Qi Yuntian's character. He was a magnanimous person. He did not care about the matter of Huang Fuzhou joining Immortal Qin, but now that this person seemed to be obstructing the master and disciple lineage, there was no need to be polite. The only way was to beat him up. Huang Fuzhou cupped his hands once more and a streak of smoke flew out, heading towards the flag gate alone. At this time, Zhuang Bufan arrived on a cloud, brushing past his shoulder as he landed on the platform. With a wave of his sleeve, a gust of yellow qi flew out and dissipated. The 100 or so disciples who had been knocked off the clouds by Su Yihong had fallen below the stage, but they were all unconscious. Qi Yuntian nodded. Junior brother Zhuang. Zhuang Bufan bowed to Qi Yuntian and retreated to the side. Qi Yuntian waved his hand, and someone went to rescue the hundreds of disciples. Although these people were disciples of aristocratic families, they were still disciples of the Yu Tsong sect. The 9 core formation cultivators were fine. But if those 100 disciples of Xian Light Shenyun God were killed for no reason, especially the core disciples from the disciples to the Qi sect disciples too. However, if those 100 or so mystic light realm disciples were killed for no reason, especially since many of them were true disciples, not long after Huang Fuzhou left, Fang Hong waved his hand and called 2 Taoists over. He said in a low voice, "Junior brothers, listen carefully. I predict that Huang Fuzhou will not be able to win against Su Yihong. If he returns in defeat, the 2 of you will follow me to kill a way out and catch Su Yihong off guard. I'm sure that Huang Fuzhou won't be able to defeat Su Yihong. If he returns in defeat, the 2 of you will follow me to kill our way out and catch Su Yihong off guard. I am sure that Huang Fuzhou will not be able to win against Su Yihong. If he returns in defeat, the 2 of you will follow me and kill him." They had been told in advance that they had to listen to Qi Yuntian's orders and didn't dare to act rashly. Chen Guo hesitated and said, "How do we explain to senior apprentice brother?" Fang Hong smiled meaningfully and said, "If Huang Fuzhou loses and we make a move, it will be in the name of rescuing a fellow disciple. Why would eldest senior brother blame us? Instead, he will only praise us for being benevolent and caring for our fellow disciples." Yu Qiyang came to a realization and praised sincerely, "Senior brother is brilliant." Chen Guo, however, was not so optimistic. "Senior brother, that Su Yihong is very powerful. Normal treasures cannot harm him. How will we deal with him?" Fang Hong laughed and said confidently, "Don't worry, 2 junior brothers. Before coming here, Master has already given me the golden Jiluao. This time, I will definitely be able to kill the enemy." Chen Guo's heart moved. Even if Fang Hong didn't get Immortal Zhu's permission, it was still tacit approval. She couldn't help but let out a breath and said, "That's good. We can try." Su Yihong just now displayed strength that was no weaker than the top 10 disciples. Fang Hong knew that it would be impossible to take him down by himself, so he did his best to rope in these 2 junior brothers. He grabbed each of their wrists to show his closeness and said sincerely, "After I kill that Su Yihong and sit on the position of the top 10 disciples, I will not mistreat you 2 junior brothers." Chen Guo and Yu Qiyang looked at each other and took a step back. They bowed and said, "We are willing to follow senior brother's orders." Good. Fang Hong reached into his sleeve and took out a jade axe and a 3 chi long short jade spear, handing them to Yu Qiyang and Chen Guo respectively. He said, "This item is not a magical weapon, but it is still a treasure. It is made from the rocks of the southernmost land, Liutsua Mountain. It contains its own spirituality and is even harder than metal and stone. It can cut through iron like mud and is not afraid of divine weapons." In a moment, "Shitty, do this." After he carefully warned them, the 2 understood and looked at the scene in the blink of an eye. They quietly moved to the northwest position and secretly waited for an opportunity. Huang Fuzhou arrived in front of the flag gate in a flash. When he was 30 feet away from Su Yihong, he dispersed the smoke and revealed himself. But facing this person, he didn't dare to be careless. He released a thin thread of starlight that twinkled in front of him and didn't reveal any flaws. Su Yihong looked up and down at Huang Fuzhou. He snorted and said, "There has to be a more decent one." Huang Fuzhou said in a low voice, "Su Yihong, the destruction of the Su clan is imminent. With your ability, if you force your way out, you still have some chance of winning. You don't need to be buried with the Su clan." Su Yihong snorted coldly and said, "Don't say such useless things. If you want to fight, then fight. Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child?" Huang Fuzhou also shut himself off. He originally wanted to use the matter of the Su clan's imminent destruction to disturb Su Yihong's state of mind. He didn't expect the other's heart to be so firm. He couldn't find any loopholes. But in the next moment, his heart shivered. He was clearly admitting that he was inferior to the other and was afraid before the battle even started. That was why he wanted to use such a method to win. After coming to his senses, he hurriedly gathered his thoughts and threw away all distracting thoughts. His eyes also became focused. Su Yihong had long since become impatient. He spread out his staff and stepped on the clouds. Huang Fuzhou didn't dare to let him get close. As soon as the other entered, he turned into a beam of light and retreated like a meteor. After a few rounds, Su Yihong also knew he couldn't catch up to this person. He laughed mockingly and said, "Do you think I can't do anything to you?" He put away the cloud contact staff and took out a large engraved bow from his sleeve. He held the bow steadily with one hand and used the fingers of the other to catch the arrow, turning the arrowhead. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Huang Fuzhou. That arrowhead was as bright as a cold star, cold and threatening, as if it wanted to fly out and devour someone. Huang Fuzhou felt a chill all over his body when the arrow was pointed at him. He was instantly shocked. He originally wanted to wear down the other's spirit, but he didn't expect the other to have such a move. This could only be said that his luck was extremely bad. One wrong move and he lost the whole game. It was too late to attack now. He shouted urgently. He gathered up all the pill aura in his body and activated the technique. In an instant, a mirror-like golden light gathered in front of him. That starlight was illuminated by the scorching sun and suddenly flickered, releasing a blinding brilliance. Su Yihong was originally focused on this person, but he didn't expect such a change. His eyes instantly felt a stabbing pain, as if he was blind. He snorted and couldn't help but loosen his fingers. He loosened his fingers based on his feelings and shot the arrow. When the arrow hit the mirror-like light, it was like a broken gong or a broken silver vase. 10,000 specks of starlight flew out. Huang Fuzhou let out a shrill groan while his countenance turned ghastly pale. One of his arms was actually severed by the arrow that swiftly flew past, and it transformed into a clump of blood and flesh. Fortunately, he'd always been experienced in battle, so he didn't panic at the critical moment. He bit the tip of his tongue and didn't stop for even a moment before turning around and transforming into a golden ray of light that swiftly fled, and he vanished in the blink of an eye. Fang Hong and his two juniors had been waiting for a long time. Now that they saw this rare opportunity, how could they delay? Fang Hong leaped out and without a word, he threw out the golden Roji All in his hand. This object was difficult to detect when it flew up. With a flash, it had already torn through the refuge pearl cloud. Su Yihong didn't take it seriously and couldn't help but cry out. The golden All pierced through his back and came out of his chest. His body rushed forward and he spat out a mouthful of blood. But after walking a few steps, he stood firmly again. Yu Qiyang's face was fierce. Originally, they had agreed to attack from 100 feet away. Seeing Fang Hong succeed, he boldly rushed forward to within 5 feet of Su Yihong. He pointed at the jade axe in his hand and it trembled. It flew into the air and chopped down on Su Yihong's neck. Su Yihong's eyes hadn't recovered, but his reaction was extremely fast. As soon as he felt a chill on his neck, he immediately tilted his head and used his forehead to meet the blade of the axe. There was a muffled, peng sound, as if metal had collided with stone. A cut immediately appeared on his forehead and blood flowed. His body was knocked back by the heavy jade axe. At this time, Chenghua also silently appeared from below. Taking advantage of the time when he was knocked back, he threw out the 3-foot-long jade spear. The spear pierced through the air and with a poochie sound, it pierced through the back of Su Yihong's waist. Half of the spearhead went in. Su Yihong gave a muffled groan. His body trembled and he coughed out a mouthful of blood. Yu Qiyang saw that the jade axe had only injured his flesh. He was afraid that by the time Su Yihong reacted, he would be in trouble. He gave a "heh" sound and not only did he not retreat, but he once again drove the jade axe that had been bounced away. The object circled around and chopped down from the side. Chenghua and Yu Qiyang cooperated extremely well with Daoren. Coincidentally, when Su Yihong was stabbed by the jade spear, the jade axe flew over and immediately chopped into his neck. Just now it stopped. Su Yihong's eyes finally had a bit of light. He felt the jade axe tremble, as if it was going to exert force again to chop off his head. He gave a cold snort and grabbed the jade axe with his hand. Yang continuously made hand signs, but no matter how much force he exerted, the jade axe could not be retrieved. He was so anxious that cold sweat flowed down his forehead. Fang Hong saw that Su Yihong was so brave and tenacious and was also shocked. He made hand signs and a giant wooden pillar appeared out of thin air. It fell down with a hong long sound and smashed into the person's back. Immediately he was knocked down from the clouds. The three of them just now let out a sigh of relief. But in the next moment, their expressions all changed. That Su Yihong actually stood up as if nothing had happened. His eyes were cold. One hand grabbed the golden awl and the other grabbed the jade axe. With a loud shout, he pulled it out. In a split second, blood gushed out like a fountain. He took a deep breath and activated his Xian Qi. The injuries on his body healed in an instant. In the blink of an eye, he was as good as new. Chapter 346. When Fang Hong, Qinghua, and Yuqiang saw this, they did not say a word and turned to leave. Under the repeated injuries, if it was anyone else, they would have died many times already. But for a strength path cultivator like Su Yihong, his body was strong and solid. If he was not killed in one shot, then there would be no more chances. Unless he sacrificed a lot of lives and exhausted his vitality, then there would be a chance of victory. But Su Yihong was not alone. If he felt his strength was not enough, he could retreat into the formation door behind him at any time. As long as there were clan members to support him and block the enemy for a while, he could take the pill and come back to fight. Fang Hong and the other two were disciples of the same master and disciple to be able to cultivate to this stage, who knew how many battles they had gone through, and their eyes were all very sharp. Just now, when they saw Su Yihong about to stand up, they had already retreated far away. They were also able to let go, seeing that there was no point in continuing to fight. They immediately gave up their original plan and escaped very quickly. As for the Ji Luo Golden Awl, Fang Hong also did not hesitate to give it up, not worried at all that it would fall into the opponent's hands. This magic weapon was a profound weapon. Without being refined, one could forget about using it. Today, the Su family was going to die. Once this person died, would there be any fear of not getting it back? Su Yihong held his rod horizontally, his eyes fierce. Staring at the backs of the three, he shouted angrily, "Scoundrels! You have the guts to sneak and attack, but don't have the guts to stay and fight." Fang Hong and the other two ignored him. No matter how arrogant Su Yihong was, he did not dare to leave the formation door. As long as he did not hurt himself, they did not care how fiercely he scolded them. Under the strange gazes of the people, the three returned to the formation platform. But they did not dare to leave without permission, and came in front of Qi Yuntan, feeling somewhat apprehensive, and said awkwardly, "Eldest senior brother, just now thinking of our fellow sect members, we were a bit rash." Qi Yuntian did not wait for him to finish, and indifferently waved his hand, saying, "The three junior brothers are not at fault, step to the side." How could he not know Fang Hong's temperament? This person was the most opportunistic. Once he grasped a sliver of opportunity, he would dare to fight with his life. In the previous battle in the eagle-perching continent, it was because of this that he was captured by the three lake demons. He had already judged in his heart that these three people would not be useful in the future, but he did not have the time to bother with them right now. He ordered them to retreat to the side and no longer paid attention to them. Qi Yuntian looked around at the disciples below the platform and shouted, "Is there anyone else who wants to step forward? You want to fight with Su Yihong?" Everyone hesitated for a moment. The fact that Su Yihong didn't collapse despite his injuries was something that everyone present had witnessed. They knew that they didn't have any magical treasures with them. Only if dozens of people attacked at the same time would they have the confidence to win. Perhaps a few lives would be lost, and he might even be one of them. Thus, he didn't dare to casually reply. After Fang Hong returned to the stage, he thought about the battle just now, and felt that if he had been more daring, he would have been able to win. He might still have a chance to kill Su Yihong. Just as he was feeling vexed, he suddenly saw some of the disciples in the distance suddenly become restless. Their expressions were somewhat excited, and there were even people shouting. He couldn't help but ask in surprise, "What happened?" Then he found out the answer. He saw a shocking rainbow streak across the sky. It went straight for Sui Hong. "So it's that Zhang Yan." Fang Hong laughed coldly and said in a muffled voice, Even if the three of us go up, what use is he alone?" Yu Qiyang and Chen Guo were deeply convinced. How brave was Sui Hong? Even though they thought highly of themselves, they still went up together. If it was one-on-one, they almost couldn't think of any way to kill this person. Sui Hong saw a sword light flying over. His eyes flashed with a hint of excitement. He squinted his eyes and took the bow and arrow in his hand. He lowered his waist into a horse stance and once again pulled the bow and arrow, the sharp arrow pointing towards the sky. This bow and arrow of his was called the Flat Mountain Bow. It could shoot monsters and spirit beasts. A distance of 100 miles would be covered in an instant. Those who were hit would have no way out. Even a graze would cause broken limbs and broken bones. After only aiming for a moment, he loosened his fingers. The bowstring vibrated beside his ears, and a black shadow let out a mournful howl. Like a bolt of lightning, it suddenly shot out. Even though the arrow light was sharp, Zhang Yan didn't dodge. He was still calm and composed. With a thought, a sword light leapt in front of him and met it in the air. With a clang, he blocked it. He then reached out and grabbed the arrow. He actually accurately caught the arrow in his hand. After playing with it for a moment, he pinched the arrowhead with both hands and exerted force. With a kacha, the arrow broke into two and he threw it down the cloud. Sui Hong's pupils shrank. He let out a shout and shook the hundreds of instruments on the cloud above his head into the air. With a point of his finger, these instruments flashed with thousands of fireflies and flew towards Zhang Yan in front of him. Zhang Yan's expression was calm. With a spell, the water-colored light screen flashed in front of him, and the hundreds of instruments disappeared in an instant. Sui Hong's gaze instantly froze. His fists made cracking sounds, and a hint of excitement flashed in his eyes. He said loudly, "Good. Such an opponent is just now interesting." Zhang Yan stopped 10 feet in front of him and stood with his hands behind his back. He was calm and composed. His body was surrounded by clouds and light smoke. His black robe fluttered in the wind, and he was full of Dao Qi. Sui Hong had also seen Zhang Yan's battle with Xiao Sha and Duda in the grand competition. He had also seen the endless methods that Zhang Yan had. He knew that Zhang Yan was a strong opponent. Although he was confident that he could win, he didn't dare to be careless. Especially when Zhang Yan's sword escape was brilliant. If he blindly dodged, he wouldn't be able to do anything under the situation where his arrows were useless. Thus, for the first time, he took a defensive stance and didn't rush forward to attack. Seeing this, Zhang Yan didn't hold back and shouted, "Fellow Taoist Su, be careful." He stretched out his hand and pointed. The stars leaped into the sky, and the sword light suddenly transformed into a rainbow light that split into 10 flying swords. Sui Hong shook the cloud-scraping staff in his hand and spun it like a dance. It produced a series of whooshing sounds and clanging sounds, blocking all of the sword lights. After a while, he said impatiently, "Zhang Yan, how can this thing hurt?" Before he finished speaking, another sword light suddenly separated from the dancing blue light. This time, it was even faster than the previous flying sword. This came very suddenly and at a very close distance. Sui Hong couldn't help but be startled. He only had time to tilt his head and the sword light brushed past his ear. He felt a burning sensation on his cheek. He reached out to touch it and found that half of his ear had been taken away. He licked the blood that flowed to the corner of his mouth. Using his Xian Qi, the other half of his ear grew back. Although he didn't fear the slashes of flying swords, if he was injured, it would still be painful. He had always been able to block when he could. Zhang Yan made him see blood the moment he came up. Feeling humiliated, killing intent immediately filled his chest. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. With one revolution of his cultivation technique, the Xian Huang giant hand appeared above his head. He spread his fingers and grabbed downwards. Su Yihong shouted loudly and swung his staff. He raised his hand and hit the Xianqi hand. Following the sound of tremors, the hand dissipated and exploded into a yellow mist. He leaped into the air and arrived above Zhang Yan's head. He roared loudly, and in an instant, the wind and clouds rolled and stirred up like a tide. The wind blew his clothes, and it seemed like there was a boundless force that wrapped Zhang Yan in a cyclone, making it difficult for him to escape. Su Yihong's eyes burst with light. He grabbed the end of the staff with both hands and gathered all the strength in his body. He first raised it up high, then with a loud roar, he swung it down. Zhang Yan stood in the middle of the cyclone, his clothes fluttering in the wind. His treasured clothes suddenly emitted a bright light that spread out several feet, protecting him within. The veins on Su Yihong's neck bulged. He let out a mischievous roar that caused the sky to rumble. The cloud-scraping staff in his hand descended with the momentum of splitting a mountain. There was an explosion in the air. His cudgel caused the radiance to cave in. Only then did he reveal a happy expression. However, when the cloud-scraping cudgel reached Zhang Yan's forehead, there was a pung sound and sparks shot out. Su Yihong looked over and couldn't help but feel his heart palpitate. He saw that Zhang Yan was standing there without moving, as if he didn't feel anything. He knew that if Zhang Yan took this blow, he would either die or be crippled. However, he didn't see that the other party wasn't injured at all. He couldn't help being stunned and bewildered. Zhang Yan shouted, "It's impolite not to reciprocate. Fellow Taoist Su, come and have a taste of Ai's technique." He formed a hand seal and there was a loud sound of tides. A ray of watercolored light flew out from his back and instantly dispersed the wind and clouds as it swept over. Su Yihong recognized that this was the technique Zhang Yan used during the competition. He didn't know the details and didn't want to take it head-on. He hurriedly executed the ground shrink divine art in an attempt to escape from the battle. However, the ray of water surged over with the force of a rushing flood. The two of them were extremely close to each other, so he couldn't run away in time. He only took a step forward and was sucked into the water. He instantly felt as if he had stepped into a turbulent torrent. The tides surged back and forth, shaking him so much that he couldn't stand. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered when he saw that his ability to shrink had been restrained. He waved his sleeve and a loud noise was heard. It sounded like countless pieces of wood and stones were moving. A thick and solid yellow light rushed into the air and spread out over 100 zhang. It crossed the blue sky and covered the sun, covering the earth and sky as it came down. Su Yihong saw that the yellow ray was falling from the sky like a mountain that was about to collapse. Before it came down, he felt suffocated and his chest tightened. He could tell that it didn't come with good intentions. He held the rod horizontally and with his divine strength, he exerted strength in his arms and with he blocked it. The two collided and a loud sound suddenly came from the horizon. Su Yihong felt a sweetness in his throat and a bloody smell rushed into his mouth. The web between his thumb and forefinger split open and his arms were broken. He couldn't help but stagger back. Zhang Yan stood on top of the cloud and sneered. This earth element true light was as heavy as a mountain. Luckily, Su Yihong cultivated the path of strength. If it was an ordinary cultivator who dared to take it head-on, they would have long since been crushed into dust. Zhang Yan activated another technique, causing the yellow light to rise several tens of feet into the air. Then he released the restraints and pressed down once more. Su Yihong was entangled by the water element true light and couldn't get away. He had no choice but to circulate his Xian technique and slightly recover from his injuries. He also raised the cloud-scraping rod in his hand. His eyes were red and he used all his strength to block the yellow ray. He felt his vision go black and spat out a mouthful of blood. He almost couldn't hold the divine weapon in his hand. Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and laughed. Su Yihong, let's see how long you can last. He divided the earth element true light into dozens of rays. They lined up and fell down one after another, smashing down one after another. For a moment, the battlefield was like a pile being hammered. After suffering dozens of attacks, Su Yihong spat out blood again and again. He finally couldn't hold on any longer and the cloud-scraping rod flew out of his hand. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and the water element true light swept out. In a flash, Su Yihong disappeared without a trace. The thousands of disciples in the field were stunned when they saw how easily he took care of Su Yihong. It was as if they were in a dream. Fang Hong and his junior brothers were also dumbfounded and couldn't make a sound. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.